Hey guys, tonight we step off the last Roman stones at the forest's lip, and the world on this side hushes like a theater before the curtain stirs. Damp bark threads your breath, and the iron taste of old nails hums on your tongue as if the path keeps a pantry of rust. You probably won't survive this, so we go slow, one hand on the rough milestone and the other testing the dark like shallow water. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are listening from and what time your clock whispers. I love how the world scatters itself around one story. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. You set your foot onto leaf mold and feel the road behind you stop at the edge like a loyal dog that won't cross the threshold. Roman surveyors laid that spine so straight that centuries later travelers still walked by the feel of it. Plain fact, but here geometry phrase, trunks lean inward with cat-like curiosity. And the air records your arrival bead by bead. You listen, then listen to your listening, the faint patter on beech leaves, the far cough of a raven, the compromising creak of your boots. You joke to yourself, if the forest is taking attendance, you just answered present with both hands. You move because not moving would be louder. The last sun on your back was warm as bread. Shadow now wears pewter and tests your lungs. A fringe custom rattles in your pocket. Iron shavings to ward woodwives or other green householders, the bits clink like tiny bells. Do bells help? Maybe only as attitude, like lucky socks at a tournament where socks are not judges. The path becomes suggestion, a parenthetical whisper between trunks. You try to read moss as punctuation. Moss prefers the north, people say, mostly true until valleys twist winds and moss follows water instead of needles. You decide guidance here is a committee, chaired by humidity. A ditch to your right holds a runnel black as iron pots. A beetle rows a leaf raft with clerkly determination. You taste the metal in the air again and answer in dialect. Iron lives in your own blood after all. Hello to hello. Once, monks walked these edges to tally timber and sins. Cistercians loved clearings and streams, wheels and prayer sharing walls. You picture a mill turning where only frogs turn. Now, bread and beer as punctuation for the day. Historians still debate whether the Romans' paved arteries kept pulsing through the early Middle Ages or broke into local fragments. You step on a cracked slab the color of wet ash and vote for continuity with your foot. Then withdraw your vote because roots have opinions. Crushed bracken releases a green sweetness. If forests had kitchens, this would be the steam, your lantern, shuttered to a narrow grin. Glances at lichens that look like maps left in rain. You prefer maps dry and folded, which is to say hopeful, every fold a line of optimism, ground swells and sinks. A conversation between burrows and roots that your saws translate. A calming fact to carry, in medieval Europe wolves roamed widely and nobles kept forest laws that bit as sharply as teeth. Not that you plan to meet either tonight. But your calm likes annotations. A twig steps on you from the side, which is to say you step on it. The crack sounds like a vow breaking in a chapel. Rabbits startle. Leaves clap, and you think of applauding back before remembering that owls are strict supervisors. Cooler air settles like chainmail on your shoulders. You roll them to loosen the rings. Ahead, two stones stand shoulder to shoulder like old friends trying to look casual. You pass and whisper thanks to no particular saint. Boundary stones at parish edges blur through your mind. People beat the bounds each year so children would remember the line. Your fingers brush lichen and come away dusted with proof that even quiet things travel. A bat scribbles a sentence above your head and erases it mid-flight. The neatest handwriting teacher you will ever meet. Your thoughts flicker to fire and shelter, and you pick neither yet. The first lesson of a new room is to listen. A cart rut crosses the path and turns boggy. Someone once laid fascines here. Bundles of sticks to float wheels. You test with your staff in the ground. Answers in fluent squelch. A dialect you decline to learn. From far off, a bell keeps the hour. Maybe a village, maybe a hermitage, maybe a cow with career goals. You let the sound be a loose fence for your nerves. You drink water leather cool from a skin, and the night drinks your breath in exchange. Fair trade, wind gathers and loosens, weaving a dull silver fabric, and now and then a hole shows a star. Outright, you find your pace. Not city fast, not market fast, but tail fast. The speed a story unwraps, you carry a pocket debate like flint, were forests feared as wilderness or used as lived in larders of wood. Food and law, historians still debate whether dread clung to tree leans or whether fines and lost paths were the practical fears. You feel both animal tingle and accountant's caution. A very medieval combination. Second joke slips out. If a ranger jumps out to ask for your license, you will show your best bark impression and hope for leniency. On the left, a bark face peers from a split knot, kin to the green men carved in stone. You nod because faces deserve nods. A trickle widens and Pete's smell strolls in, confident as a cat on a wall. You prod the edge, wary of earth pretending to be floor when it is really lid. Your pack creaks like a small ship. A hedgehog unknots itself near your boot and decides you are not a plot twist. Both of you relax. You angle toward hazel where the ground rises, old coppice stools where neat rings of management. Someone cut here and returned. Proof that even wildness keeps appointments when asked politely. You touch a stem and think of arrows, then of walking sticks offered to tired strangers. Hospitality in wood. A cold bead slides from a leaf down your neck. You accept it without flinch, a knighthood conferred by dew. Third small joke. If you had packed a mirror, you could check whether bravery looks different on your face. But the forest seems unconcerned with your brand. It cares only for the pace of your feet and the hush you are learning. You stop, and stopping is not failure, it is grammar. A comma in the sentence of moving. From the hollow of an ash you take a breath that tastes faintly of honey. Perhaps bees lived here last year, or a saint hid bread long ago. A sure fact to hang on. Monks baked enough loaves to feed work crews raising granges and barns. Bread is architecture's sibling. Your own loaf waits in cloth. Sacrament to plain hunger. The undergrowth thins and the sky lowers. You step into a small glade stitched by moonlight. Bassinets of light among tufted grass. You decide against fire. The damp would only tease it into sulks. Besides, your eyes are learning the gray alphabet and each letter matters. Last thought before you move on. Tomorrow the road may remember you if you touch it with patience. Tonight the forest has introduced itself. It listened when you arrived. It listens still, and you, a guest, practice answering softly, 1 foot. Then the next. You keep the tree lean at your back like a witness and bring the town with you in the creases of your pocket. The dare still hot as a coal you should not have picked up earlier under the crooked beam of the alehouse. The reeve with a lemon peel smile banged a cup and said you could square a winter's debt. If you crossed the forest and brought proof you reached the far parish. Half the town hooted, half pretended not to listen, and someone tore a town charter while waving it like a flag. The wax seal split clean as a moon. You now carry that torn strip stiff as bark, ink black as a thunderhead spelling names of men who would never walk where you are walking. You did not mean to say yes. The word tripped out like a puppy through an open gate, but pride does that. It runs ahead and you jog after with the leash. The bargain has rules, of course, because medieval bargains love rules. Return with proof the forester on the eastern side has marked you safe. A token, a tally cut into a hazel stick, or even a slip from a fairy ledger if the river ferryman can be coaxed to write. You roll this in your mouth like penny bread. Proof, what is proof to trees? The strip of charter clasps when you unfold it. You tilt it to the lantern's grin, a crest, half a saint's foot, and words promising safe passage to freemen for 3 days and 2 nights during fair weeks. You are neither freeman nor fair, so the letter and you shrug at each other. Second joke. You realize you only read the terms and conditions of the forest after clicking accept with your feet. You remember the bat handwriting from last night and the moss that lied politely. You aim for the cart track where the ground firms and the foxgloves lounge like bored trumpeters. The town's breath has left you. Only the forest's patient counting remains. Fact to steady you. Charters in the 13th century traveled as voices as much as vellum. A scribe wrote, but crowds heard. Mayors and reeves read them aloud on feast days. Seals swung like brave cherries. This is solid history, you tell yourself, then almost laugh because cherries are not brave. The strip crinkles, smelling of lamp smoke and old parchment cupboards. You tuck it near your iron shavings. Green householders, if any, may like literacy as much as iron. You practice the story you will tell the forester, neat as bread slices. You cross the bounds, you kept to paths, you cut no oak, you owe no fine, and you would like a notch on a tally so your debts can sleep in town. The wind runs its hand over the canopy, and the canopy pretends not to enjoy it. You slide past coppiced hazel without breaking a twig, remembering that even wildness keeps appointments when asked politely. A black feather rests like punctuation on a stump. You decline to read it. The ground here is littered with clues but none. Promise they like you. A mile on, a ditch fattens into a brook. You resist throwing the charter in to see if it swims. Fringe detail swims up regardless. You recall an old woman who swore that to swear honestly one must bite an iron key. A church key if possible, so the oath tastes of doors. She probably would have told you to bite the charter seal too. You will not test that. Wax looks like jam to the hopeful, and you are hopeful. You kneel, rinse your scarf, and listen for bells. Last night there was a bell with career goals. Tonight only owls audit your progress. You submit your silence like paperwork and move on. Branches ahead have been trimmed to a bureaucrat's idea of neat. So you find the forester's handwriting on the world. A cut here, a notch there, a pollard willow muscled like a wrestler flexing for saints. You call out courtesy. And courtesy answers in the form of no one, which is often how the forest says you may pass. Your staff meets an old causeway, stones paused under reed, and you step like a priest doubting. The memory of the drowned causeway you have not yet reached glimmers like a rumor from tomorrow. But this is only rehearsal. A dragonfly saws the air with blue glass. You grin because even saws can be pretty. Joke 3, you consider adding excellent with dragonflies to your resume for the reeve. Then remember, resumes have not been invented, and settle for being excellent at not falling in. Somewhere among birch a soft clink repeats. Iron on iron, you angle toward it and find a charcoaler smiler cooling like a buried moon. Turf peeled back and stacked. The cotters have gone, but their tripod still hangs a pot. Smoke writes a low sentence you can almost read. The miler is a study in patience and airflow. And you picture the town's patience, short as a child's sleeve, stretching for once. If you return with that notch, you finger the torn strip again, mainstream truth to anchor the moment. The charter of the forest in 1217 clawed back common rights after the big stage play of Magna Carta, letting small folk pasture pigs for acorns and gather wood where royal law had slapped hands. Your strip is no royal charter, only a parochial cousin with ambitions. But the idea smells the same, oak and oath. Still, historians still debate whether these words, once written, became lived rules for the poor or stayed theater for the better sealed. Some argue that villagers leveraged them shrewdly at court days. Others say the wax cooled and the woods went on as before. You press the parchment, as if heat from your skin could keep its promises elastic. The path shoulders upward. Bracken sighs, and a fallen beech blocks the way. Beneath it, the kind of snare you met yesterday yawns with its wooden grin. A callback with teeth. You treat it like an autograph from a celebrity. You do not want to meet twice. Step wide. Breathe. Say thank you for the reminder. Proof can also be not falling into old mistakes. At the crest you find boundary stones prinked with lichen freckles. Processional prayers cling like soft burrs. You tap each with your staff, not as a charm, rather as attendance. You are here, present, please mark it. Stones, and if there is an angel of the registry, please file under temporary courage. The sun is a thumbprint through cloud. The light pewter and gentle on your eyes. You eat along the way, cheese that argues for salt, a heel of loaf, hard enough to bounce, bread as sibling to architecture. You learned that from monks in your mind, and it holds. Every bite is another roof joist in you. The track forks, one way laughs in mud, the other in thorns. You choose thorns. Adjust sleeves, and remember the town's faces when you said yes. Some bright with sport, some soft with envy disguised as advice. The alehouse beam creaked and the charter dangled, half like a trapeze. You wish it had come with footnotes. Or snack vouchers. Fourth joke, you promise yourself to add that to the suggestion box of destiny. Further on, a carved face peers from an oak burrow, greener than last night's lintel companion. Maybe the same personality on a working holiday. The green man's meaning is a favorite argument at hearths and colleges, fertility, satire, or simply good foliage gone theatrical. You nod as if you understand and tuck the debate with your flint. You touch the torn seal and practice your pitch again. Storyteller to forester, traveler to ledger. Your voice finds an ASMR rhythm the trees do not interrupt. A soft fairy bell finally purls from the east, different from last night, clearer. Not a cow's ambition but an oar's heartbeat. You descend toward it through alder that writes vertical poetry in damp. The river appears like a sleeve of tarnished silver and the ferry of one or slides from under a willow's ragged salon. The ferryman's hat has lived 20 lives and he measures you as if he weighed travelers for flour. Payment, he says, not today's coin. Tomorrow's use, he has standards. You offer the dare, the debt, the torn charter. He nods with the slow courtesy people give to trouble they have met before. He dips the oar and the boat turns with the patient authority of a millstone. Sound shrinks. Only the knock of water on planks. Your lantern's grin closes to a thoughtful line. Midstream, he asks for proof. Not future proof, proof now, so you give him the story. Trimmed and polished, you name the boundary stones. Identify the charcoaler's tripod. Demonstrate the callous earned by not falling into yesterday's snare. He considers. Then draws a tally on a peeled willow stick, one neat notch. Signs it with a slash that could be river rune or simple habit. Fringe detail circles back. He ties a thread of red wool to the notch. Claims it keeps river spirits from editing his writing. You decide not to argue with a copy editor made of water. He beaches the ferry on the far mud, points to a post set with iron nails and worn St. Metals, and asks you to nail your torn strip. There, the post looks like a hedgehog that learned bureaucracy. You press the parchment, tap a nail home with your staff and the sign becomes a little truer for having you attached. You were here, the boatman nods and hands you the tally. Says the forester will honor it if the forester wants to, which is either comfort or philosophy. Either way it weighs as much as a coin in your palm. Your nerves unclench but only slightly. The eastern trees are the same species as the western trees, and yet they watch with new eyes. The bargain is still a bargain. The way back will also be a way through. The ferryman asks for his fare now, not coin. Something useful tomorrow. You offer the iron shavings. He smiles as if you remembered an old joke together and pockets them in a leather purse already ringing with small apologies. As you step away, he adds a fact like a tip. The forester has a hound that hates lies but loves cheese. You pat your pouch like a diplomat and promise to share. The river behind you resumes its indifference. Ahead, a path climbs toward a low ridge where beaches comb the sky. You tuck the tally deep. The charter is now more whole than law, but it has done its work. And the dare cools from coal to ember. You walk, letting the speed of the tale carry you. A steady murmur, 1 foot, then the next. The forest accepts your proof exactly as much as it needs to, no more, no less, and you find that fairness oddly generous. The bell from the ferry thins to a thread behind you, and the ridge gives you a view of nothing but more green. Which is fine. You are learning to enjoy repetitions that are not quite repeats. A joke you tell your nerves. After all, the hanging snare taught you that the forest's punchlines are sharp. You keep to the fox cart track and smell it before you see it. That sweet tar cold tang like a damp library of fires. Blue smoke combs sideways through alder and you follow as if it were yarn and, you the kitten. A clearing opens no wider than a cottage floor, and there sits the miler, a great earthen loaf under turves stitched with pegs and patience. Its flank breathing through the little vents the way sleeper breathes through parted lips. A tripod leans over it like a parish clerk. A pot hangs forgotten, and the ground is tattooed with round prints where billets stood stacked and waiting for their turn to become light. You crouch and listen, low crackle, soft subsidence, a cat purring in a cupboard, mainstream fact to set your mind's foot. Charcoal making means starving wood of air so it sweats out its smoke, and leaves almost pure carbon. Fuel for smiths and smelters who need heat hotter than wood's bright generosity. Forest law watched this craft with both eyes because iron's appetite could strip a hillside. You say this in your head to sound sensible, but the miler makes you want to whisper. The charcoalers' huts crouch nearby, barrel roofed with bark, broom hung to dry like gray hair, and a small shrine of nailed metals and soot candles winks. From a stump, you lower your lantern to a slit, because the first taboo announces itself without words. No naked flame near a sleeping fire, even a bragging ember can wake a giant. A charcoaler steps from shadow with a face as serious as bread and nods as if he expected you yesterday. His tunic carries the smell of weeks, smoke and wet wool and iron sweat, a combination the forest already recognizes in you. He touches the turf with the back of his hand, checks the draft with a palm near a vent, and says without looking up that you tempted fate bringing a lantern. You apologize with the small ritual of closing it further. Light like a secret kept between two fingers. He relaxes one button's worth and begins to teach you how not to wake what must burn asleep. No whistling, he says, not because of spirits, but because whistling is for wind and you do not call cousins to a quarrel. No pointing pricks, you move your whole hand if you must show. And no counting aloud, numbers make the stack think of ends. You nod, respectful of this grammar, joke one escapes anyway. You promise not to sing either unless the miler requests a ballad. The man gives you a sideways look that almost smiles and almost does not. The forest is not a theater, he says, then shrugs. Some nights a song keeps a man awake when the vents must be trimmed at 3. He shows you how he listens to the stack. Ear to earth, palm to turf, a doctor diagnosing a patient who is also the medicine for someone else. He cuts a new eye in the cover and the smoke brightens for a heartbeat before settling to that. Thin blue you smelled on the ridge. If it goes white, he says, we close. If it goes sulky and dark, we open. And if it goes invisible, we panic quietly. The fringe details arrive like birds pecking crumbs. He keeps a sprig of St. John's wort tucked into his cap on Midsummer Week because some swear smoke behaves better when told the sun remembers it. He ties red thread, like the ferryman did, around the vent pegs to remind himself which ones he turned in the dark. He refuses to carry bread upside down because that invites the executioner to supper. Old Parisian superstition leaked this far like wine through wood. You tuck that away with the iron key oath and the river's wool thread and begin to see how small, odd promises stitch a life secure. Wolves, you ask, because you remember the ferryman's tip about the forester's hound and think of other teeth, with less honorable employers. The charcoaler shrugs and lists which saints wolves supposedly fear. St. Hubert's cross pinned near the hatband. St. Genevieve's candle if you can keep it from sulking in rain. Or simply St. John's Eve fires, whose coals women once carried home to bless the bread. He knows a man who swears a wolf will not cross a line traced with wort gathered before dawn, and another who sings the Gospel of John aloud and claims the syllables confuse jaws. He, however, prefers a high tree and good luck. Mainstream truth peeks in again. Bounties on wolves were posted in parishes, tails counted at law days, but wolves do not consult parishes. So you store the saint list like charms in a drawer. Historians still debate whether woodland workers like charcoalers lived on the edge of village life, feared as half-wild and smudged with secrecy, or whether they sat at the same benches as everyone else, just more smoky at vespers. Some argue their itinerant rhythms and night work made them liminal folk. Others point to contracts and dues that read as plain as any plowman's. You watch this man adjust his vents with lawful attention and wonder if the answer is both marginal and central, like the ring of fire under the turf. He asks what sends you through a sleepwalking fire country, and you show the tally stick the ferryman notched, the little red slash bright against your palm. A callback in wood. He eyes it, approves the handwriting of the slash, and sniffs at the torn charter nailed by the ferry post. Says he saw such papers once waved by men who liked waving more than walking. You explain your debt, and the Reeves lemon peel smile, and he flattens his lips like a door. Offers bread as if to nail your courage to the moment. You remember the forester's hound loves cheese and save a corner for diplomacy. Joke 2 tries itself. You tell the miler you are also loved by hounds when bribery is available. He snorts a laugh that is mostly smoke. Teaching continues, sound is part of the fuel. He says, keep your voice low so the fire keeps its temper. Footsteps must be kind to the earth. A stamp can jar the cone and let air in where it will do bragging. Light is another rule. If a rider comes at night with a proud torch, the men will turn their backs and ask him to be a moon instead of a sun. Your lantern's slit feels like a respectful bow now. He leads you to the huts, shows a bed of bracken turned each day so its sap does not remind the back of the hours too loudly. Shows a rake made from hazel teeth for grooming embers if the cone opens, and a shovel bright at the lip, a tool polished not by soap but by attention. A child's toy hangs by a string. A wooden horse smoked to a marble gray. Proof that lives happen here, not just work. You sip broth pitched somewhere between nettle and comfort and learn the testing tricks. Hold your palm before the vent. Feel the slow breath. If it is too hot, you shade with a slate and count slowly, not aloud. Each number a pet you do not name. If a cinder leaps as if to complain, you imagine it back to sleep. The man has a face for convincing embers, and perhaps you are learning one. You find joy in the quiet competency. How the earth yields charcoal and silence and a place to stand, and you are not required to call any of it adventure for it to be one. You ask about roads and he points with his whole hand, polite as the taboo requires, toward a track that will keep you east and out of a bog with ambitions. He adds a last catechism about saints. And wolves, if you have Saint Hubert, show him to the wind. If Saint Genevieve, keep her lantern low. And if neither, remember wolves are accountants of opportunity. Do not register yourself as a loose coin. Joke 3 files itself. You promise to jingle less. Then remember you paid your iron shavings to the ferryman and now jingle not at all. The miler sighs, a little subsidence that sounds like someone settling after a long day. You help tamp a sag with a spade and feel the cone's gratitude in the way the blue smoke steadies. The charcoaler nods as if you have been given a letter of reference and says you may walk the edge of the burn and back again for luck. You do, toes careful, the world narrowed to the murmur of controlled fire and the library smell of sap turning into something that will burn hotter and leave less ash. History folded into a daily chore. By the time you shoulder your pack, the light has gone the color of pewter again, and your lantern's brief grin is the bravest face in the clearing. You thank the man with your softest voice, promise to tell the forester he keeps a clean burn, and tuck the corner of cheese for the hound. You depart with new grammar in your steps. No stamping, no pointing, no counting aloud, and a list of saints that may or may not function as passwords. Yet the knowledge sits in you like a steady coal, not bright, not boastful, just sure. The path curls away, and as you pass the alder fringe, the blue smoke thins into air. Your clothes keep a souvenir, and the forest adopts the scent like it recognizes your enrollment. Boundary stones are somewhere ahead, and another hazard waits with its wooden grin. But you carry a notch, a story, and a handful of gentle taboos, which is to say, you walk wiser and you walk on. Bracken crowds the path like a polite audience leaning in, and you wade through its fronds with the humility of a minor actor crossing the big stage. The charcoaler's blue on your clothes has faded to a memory, but their grammar stays. No stamping, no counting aloud, no pointing with sharp fingers. You keep your voice low and your eyes busy. Boar sign begins to write itself at your feet. Churned earth as if a potter worked the clay in impatience. Bark rubbed smooth at knee height where a tusk has practiced its autobiography. And hoof cuts like tidy little half-moons. You ease forward because the forest has a sense of humor and you would rather be in on the joke. A hedge of hazel trims the wind and the bracken deepens to a green sea. You lift your knee higher and then the earth wakes a hinge under your boot. A sapling bows with the speed of a released breath and a rope catches you around the waist. The world turns and you discover the sky is available in the feet direction. You hang, breath knocked sideways. Your lantern swings a narrow grin over your face, and you think with perfect clarity that everything here hunts even by accident. Joke 1 taps your shoulder. You consider writing a stern note to gravity complaining about its customer service hours. The sapling creaks, rope hums, and the blur resolves into leaves. The old snare design is simple: a spring pole, a loop, a catch stick that a snout or a careless traveler trips. Boar would rear and tangle. You have reared and obliged. Your staff has flown to a fern bed and your pride is suspended alongside you like a coat. You breathe because advice from the charcoalers suggested every fire and every problem prefers calm. You test the rope with cautious twitches and find the knot has married itself to a peg. Under the leaf litter, reachable if you fold like a pocket knife, you fold, the world tightens its belt around your waist and your breath decides to be smaller. You hook 2 fingers under the line and inch toward the ground. Fringe detail arrives like a helpful ant. You remember a village woman who swore that a sprig of mugwort tucked into a shoe keeps fatigue and missteps away on long paths. You had tucked nettle advice instead. All enthusiasm, less charm. You promise the universe a mugwort experiment later and keep inching. The loop has bitten more in fright than malice, and you talk to it as if it were a fretful calf. Soft voice, soft breath, your fingers find the peg and the peg finds you unconvincing. You wriggle, the sapling complains, and the loop slips 1 bark hair, enough to give you a new angle. Your palm hits the catch stick and the trap gives up with a sulky sigh. You tumble to knees, grateful for Bracken's cushion and mildly offended by its sense of humor. Joke 2 arranges itself. You have never admired the engineering of a fern before, and now you would like to nominate it for a fellowship in unintended mercy. You sit very still to persuade the forest that no chase is necessary. When you stand, you do it like bread rising. Slow and inevitable, your lantern's grin widens a touch and you bring your breath back into a useful relationship with your ribs. Practical thoughts return. If a boar set this off, it might still be near. If a man set it and watches, he may be less than pleased to see his skyfish climb back to shore. You call out courtesy as you learned, whole hand open to the air, stating that you have taken nothing but a lesson and will reset the rig. The trees do not file grievances and no man answers. So you retie the loop, respect for craft even when the craft misfiled your name. You set the peg at a lazier angle so that a human passing will brush it awake rather than hoist it. A kindness you hope fate notices. Mainstream fact steadies your thoughts. Hunting boar in much of medieval Europe was a privilege guarded by lords and kings. Forest law in Norman England protected vert and venison with penalties sharp enough to carve caution into anyone's bones. A commoner snaring a noble's boar could pay fines that bled a family for seasons or lose more than coin. This is history with edges and you feel them. Yet the forest cares little for parchment boundaries. Its rules ride in tusks and saplings. Historians still debate whether illicit snares like this one made more meat for poor tables than official hunts ever could. Records tilt toward what officials noticed and punished while villages kept quieter ledgers in bellies and memories. Some scholars read prosecutions as proof of widespread trapping. Others see them as exceptional stories copied for drama. The truth leans under the bracken in 100 small loops and knots. You touch the rope again and think of knots and law both loving. Tightness. A boar's mind is not legalistic. It is weather and hunger and the wish to be left alone while powerful people write poems about chasing it. You step away and study the ground. Here is the smudged print of a man's hobnail. Here the deeper gouge of a hooved panic. Here the scuttle of something with more opinions than weight. You retrieve your staff from the fern bed and its smoothness feels like a friend who did not leave. Your hip throbs like a slow drum and you convince it to become a quieter metronome. A green woodpecker laughs far off in the key of gossip. The old charter strip rustles in your pouch and you think of the ferryman's red thread. Ink and wool, 2 kinds of promises. You set a little square of cheese aside in your pocket because the forester's hound, according to rumor with a hat, admires dairy diplomacy. Joke 3 widens its eyes. If the hound loves cheese more than truth, you plan to offer a philosophical tasting flight. You move on because the forest likes people who do not linger at the sight of their near mistakes. The bracken sighs back into place, and you treat each step like a footnote you are willing to defend. A low wind reads your hair like a careful editor, and you accept some revisions. You pass an oak where the bark carries a polished patch at snout height, and you lay your palm there like a seal. It is warm from the late light, or warm from the story of rubbing that repeats on winter mornings and summer evenings. In a hollow beyond, you find a small collection of things that read as shrine, or cache a bent nail. A child's marble runs smooth as a river with no stones. A cowrie shell that must have ridden pockets from the sea, and a tuft of red wool, a color that has followed you from fairy to fire to snare. You leave it in place because someone else's grammar is not yours to edit. Fringe tradition wakes. Some folk lay a crust of bread crosswise by a field gate to persuade wandering things with sharp noses to attend to blessing instead of mischief. Others knot red thread around a child's wrist to teach the world to see careful. Your hand hovers, then moves on. The sun frets behind cloud, then loosens. The day makes a small promise it keeps for 3 minutes. You take the warmth and store it as usable currency. A little further and you encounter a boar wallow, a teacup of mud enlarged by generations into a tub for a monarch with low standards. Prints overlap like gossip. You listen, your breath and the flies and the chinking note of a distant chain on a harness. Perhaps a woodman's oxen, perhaps imagination. You let the thought be a fence, not a hunt, and you stand. Down your muscles, your mind opens the folio of facts it keeps, and you add one in neat ink. Bracken has served as bedding and thatch and as ash for soap-making when burned. Its usefulness is a quiet barter with the land. You are learning to see usefulness everywhere, even in a trap, because a trap teaches visibility. You mark the snare's location in your head as a shape of trees and a particular mocking bend of fern, a callback to your earlier education. Read the moss, note the lie in the green directions. Trust the water more than the rumor of north. You want to laugh and do not because laughter has edges sometimes, and you are near the kind of silence that eats edges with care. You walk, shake out your shoulders, and test your hips again. Your pack rustles with its small horde of unavoidable noises. A leaf trapped under a strap, a button clicking a prayer book that is really a folded scrap of the torn charter. You murmur apologies to the quiet, and the quiet accepts because you are learning. You arrive at a spill of boundary stones, and you mark attendance with the staff 1, 2, 3, not allowed because numbers can wake what should sleep. The lesson holds. At the third stone, a green face peeks in a coincidence of leaves, and your memory of carved lintels nods back. Green men everywhere. An argument with bark, fertility or satire, or an artisan's inside joke. The debate continues over mugs and manuscripts, while the forest regards both with an amused eyebrow. It does not possess. You bow with your whole hand to the space and listen for the ferryman's bell in the east. Nothing but a rook accounting for his day with a voice like a leather hinge. By the time the light begins to unspool toward evening, you have learned the trick of rising from snares into walking again. The first rule has set in your muscles. Everything here hunts, even by accident. You decide to hunt alertness and kindness and leave the meat to those who grew the tusks. Joke 4 leans in for a curtain call. You make a mental sign that reads beware of ferns and consider posting it where only bracken will read. The path straightens by courtesy, not by law, and your feet take the gift. Soon you will need fires and permissions and perhaps a hound's good opinion. For now you are a traveler revised by rope and returned to the grammar of ground. You test each step with a priestly staff. You keep the cheese ready like a footnote to a future conversation. You breathe soft, and the forest hears you choosing to go on. You move with boar-learned caution until the track kinks around a thorn, and there, where the beeches braid their arms into a green nave, waits a man with a cap like a withered mushroom and a measuring stick longer than his patience. His hound lifts its head as if sniffing your intentions letter by letter. Nostrils turning pages, you are already reaching for the diplomat's cheese because rumor travels faster than boots. The forester does not bother with hello. He watches the hound watch you and then grunts as if your name were a not to be checked twice. Show, he says, palm out not for coin but for story. You give him the tally the ferryman notched, the red thread bright as a small oath. And he tests its edge with a thumbnail the way a smith tests temper. The hound leans in, accepts a square of cheese with the solemnity of an oath taking and sneezes truth on your boots. He scratches the dog's ear once, which in this parish qualifies as absolution, then lifts his stick and begins to count things you did not know could be counted. The first is mast, acorns that do not yet exist but will fall like brown rain come Michaelmas if storms are. Polite, he reads the canopy as if each leaf had written a forecast. This many pigs per acre if the wind behaves, fewer if the worms publish early, and he slices your air with numbers not allowed, only little taps on the stick, like a drummer rehearsing under his breath. Mainstream fact to steady the moment. He reminds you that pannage, the right to run pigs on autumn acorns and beech mast, was real coin in these parts, reckoned in Doomsday's old Latin and, in Reeves' chalk, villages owed renders measured in swine or silver to lords and abbeys. The dates ringed around Michaelmas when mast fell and bacon futures were decided by weather. He says it like scripture because it pays like scripture. Meanwhile the hound leans on your knee with the confidence of an auditor who has found no fraud. Joke 1. You thank it for the clean audit and vow to expense the cheese under hospitality if you ever invent receipts. The forester squints at your boots, at the way bracken spores powder the leather, and decides you have walked honestly rather than sprinted dishonestly. He explains his work as if you were already apprenticed. He keeps 3 ledgers and none are paper, 1 in the bark scars, 1 in hoof prints, and 1 in fines. The last ledger is the one that weighs the heaviest. He gestures toward the oak shade where a swineherd will later tie pigs by the leg with long leashes and let them work the floor as if sweeping with noses. He lists the fees, a coin for each snout, a promise for each trespass, and when coin fails, he will accept in kind a stack of billets cut to the forester's arm. Or, he taps the stick with a meaning shaped like iron, a handful of nails for bridges and stiles. Iron travels straight in a crooked world. Joke 2 peers out, you consider offering your remaining shirt buttons as emergency currency. But they are wooden and the bridges prefer nails with ambition. He sets the butt of his stick beside your boot and asks what business you have with Eastern bounds. You tell the debt, the Reeves lemon peel smile, the torn charter now a hedgehog of nail holes by the ferry post, and the man's mouth flattens as if smoothing dough for a sober loaf. He makes a notch on his tally to mirror the ferryman's and ties his own red thread, so the world will recognize continuity when it sees it. He has the air of someone who distrusts discontinuities and with good reason. Acorns fail and winters teach harsh math. He points his whole hand, polite even in sternness, toward a grove where pigs will once again be citizens. He tells you not to walk there when mast is heavy unless you fancy a debate with 40 determined philosophers in bristles. Fringe detail slips in with a grin. He says in the good years they paint the pig's ears with red ochre and hang little bells from a leather collar, so a swineherd can sort gossip by sound. Some even thread a wooden yoke through a snout ring to keep the cleverest from burrowing under fences like scholars under arguments. You picture a procession of tiny bells moving through beech shade like a sleepy festival and decide the forest has more musical instruments than the abbey. The forester's face never quite softens, but he cannot stop the corner of his mouth from admitting the bells are cheerful. Then he returns to arithmetic, acorns, feet, hooves, and fines. He says, ruin winters faster than wolves. Wolves are honest appetite with a tail. Men with axes and uncounted pigs are appetite with paperwork. He names the penalties as if naming weather, for cutting oak without leave, for ring barking to widen pasture, for setting snares in vert reserved to lord or king. The sums are heavy enough to bend a family for years. You mention the charter of the forest clause you remembered, how words once loosened royal fingers from common rights. He nods the way a carpenter nods at a tool that fits the hand but still needs sharpening. Historians still debate whether forest law was relentless tyranny or a hard fence that people learned to lean against. He says, some say peasants lived black with fear. Others show court rolls where villagers argued their case and often won. The forest keeps both memories, the law's teeth and the law's bargaining table. He caps the thought with a whistle shaped like a leaf. You file the debate with your flint. The hound, promoted by Cheese to assistant professor of honesty, presses its head into your thigh again, and you pet it like an argument you have decided can rest. The forester eyes your lantern and approves the shy slit. The charcoalers taught you something worth keeping. He admits, and he knows their blue smoke like punctuation. He has a list of taboos. Do not bring a proud fire to a sleeping wood. Do not empty a swine trough near a stream. Do not promise a farmer you will cut a path where his wife gathers rushes, because paths convert private chores into public convenience and then fines into conversations with teeth. He marks a boundary stone with his stick and tells you it is not the stone that marks the line but the walking that marks the memory. Children will be brought to beat these bounds at Rogation Tide, so they can grow knowing where their bread ends and their neighbor's begins. You remember tapping stones before and feel included in an exam you did not study for but seemed to pass by walking. Joke 3 curls up. You imagine the hound running the bounds with a bell and passing the class with highest woof. The forester grunts, which is generous laughter in a man who keeps ledgers in hoofprints. He orders you to repeat back the rules in your own words, and you do. No cutting oak, no pins in the Lord's hides, no turning deer into sausages by metaphor, no pigs in mast without counting. And always show your hands with all 5 fingers when you step onto someone else's grass. He adds a quiet one. If a widow asks your help dragging Stormfall, help. And if anyone calls that theft, bring the argument to him. He will count compassion as part of his fee sheet. It is the only tithe he likes paying. In exchange, he expects you not to pretend ignorance if you meet a man with livery half-sewn who wants to sell you venison with the antlers still thinking. Your back remembers the snare and agrees to uprightness like a joint remembering weather. Then, like a schoolmaster making a concession for diligence, he gives you a gift you did not know to want. He points out a small oak, hardly taller than your worry, and shows you how its leaves shine darker above than below, how its buds pack tight like a plan. Tells you this one will live your lifetime, and more if storms miss and men mind their appetites. Take off your hat when you pass, he says, not for saints. For shade you will thank when your knees are reed years older. The hound sighs as if seconding the motion, and you bow to a sapling the way you bowed to boundary stones. It feels correct. Debate of the day returns. He offers another. Scholars argue whether Europe was once a mantle of deep wildwood or a long mosaic of wood pasture and meadows braided with hedges. He taps the stick on thin air. I say it was always patchwork, boar and barley, thorn and altar, stitched by feet and hooves and the need to be warm in February. You tuck the idea into the same pocket as your flint, cheese crumbs, and courage. He writes a neat cross on your tally beside the ferryman's notch and says the Eastern Ride will honor it if the ride is in a civil mood, which is an open category. He warns you that a causeway ahead is sulking under peat, and that if your staff does not like a step, you should treat your staff as wiser than pride. Callback accepted. You promise to test every footprint with priestly care. Before he lets you go, he reaches into a pouch and produces 3 bent nails, iron weary from a previous life in a style. Keep them, he says, not for barter, for memory. I like to think each traveler who leaves me takes a small weight from the fines ledger and bends it toward discretion. The hound sneezes again, as if punctuating the sentiment with a blessing made of dust. Joke 4 swings by and waves. You resolve to carry the nails as if they were tiny saints, Saint Bracket, Saint Hinge, and Saint Don't Be Foolish. The forester allows his mouth the luxury of a half smile, then points you east with the whole hand. The counting complete for now. As you go, the bells of imagined pigs seem to tinkle ahead of their season, and you picture winter larders that might Not panic if acorns keep their appointment. You tuck the tally deep, feel the nails like 3 commas against your ribs, and step back into the green arithmetic, mindful that here fairness is measured by hooves and roots and the weight of promises you actually keep. Night is not a door here, it is a fabric that thickens one thread at a time, and as it draws close you switch to the grammar you learned from smoke and ledgers. No stamping, no counting allowed. Whole hand gestures if you have to ask the dark a question. The ridge gentles into beach shade and your lantern's grin narrows to a respectful whisper. The world seems to hear better when you speak less, and then the wind does that trick it likes, turning its head to listen behind itself. And you hear what it heard, pads on leaf mold, soft as a potter's breath. Not many, not few, just enough to warn your bones that you are made of things with names. Joke one wants to sprint and you restrain it, telling yourself that if the wolves are taking a census you will answer in neat block letters and avoid cursive. The sound is there and then not. A stitch in the fabric, and on its far side a bell drops 3 notes into the trees. Not the fairy bells or heartbeat. Something smaller. A sheep bell maybe, or a pilgrim's. Or a night watch tapping time against a worry. The bell repeats and you let it be a fence for your thoughts. Wolves and bells share a country the way ink and rule do. The foresters talk of fines and hoofs turns over in your pocket with the 3 bent nails. You touch them like little saints, because even courage enjoys a rosary. Mainstream truth anchors itself calmly in your head. Many parishes across medieval Europe posted bounties for wolves, payment by the head or tail at law days, and kings installed officials to pursue them. France kept louveteers, royal wolf officers, for centuries, and in England and the German lands you can read the arithmetic of tales turned into coin across court rolls. History with teeth you can count. You murmur this to your own breath, a soothing footnote. Meanwhile the pads circle your hearing. Without closing it, you do not see eyes, you see the idea of eyes, which is enough for decent behavior. You slow to the pace of prayer at dusk, which is to say you move, but you do not insist. The bell, now 2 of them, drift where the land dips. You remember from afternoon arithmetic that pigs will have bells when mast falls, and you picture future tinklings like a barley-colored constellation moving under beach. Tonight is not that festival. Tonight is inventory. You place your staff carefully because the forester warned the causeway ahead is sulking, and you speak to the ground the way the charcoaler spoke to his fire. Soft and specific, the pads fade, not far, just choosing a parallel line to yours, a courteous decision that takes the heat out of your neck. Fringe custom edges in and you humor it, turning your cloak inside out for 6 steps. Because an old woman once swore that the world sometimes forgets what it named a person when clothes pretend to be their own lining, and forgetting can be a safety. You turn it back because dignity might be useful later, and you prefer the pocket with cheese reachable in case honesty needs culinary support. The bell settles on 3 slow notes. Then silence, then 3 again, like a monk explaining a point he knows you will forget in the morning. Historians still debate whether wolves in the Middle Ages hunted people with any regularity or if fear inflated brief seasons into a standing terror. Some chronicles paint winters with teeth, and parish accounts show urgency in bounties. Others read the same ledgers and argue that livestock, not people, paid most of the tax. The argument paces across centuries the way the pads pace across your hearing now, staying in the trees while the bell marks your lane. You accept that both can be true, fear honest and numbers stubborn. You reach a hollow where the ground slicks into peat dark and your staff translates hesitation into a counsel you obey. Step wide, bless the forester with a thought, and edge along a fringe of rush. The lantern's grin a careful line you keep narrow so the forest can pretend you are a star that forgot to go home. Joke 2 whispers that if the wolves carry a ledger they are writing you down under miscellaneous, and you hope their accountant has a fondness for red thread and bent nails. You tuck the ferryman's notch deeper because talismans like feeling involved. The bell does not move for a while, which is almost worse than moving, and you learn a new unit of time. The length of breath between being heard and not being heard. In that span you assemble another calming fact. This one about bells themselves. Sheep and cattle wore them not as jewelry but as practical theology. A shepherd could stand in fog and no by. Clapper which lost appetite drifted and where. Monasteries and villages rang hours that taught lungs when to rest and when to labor. Metal sound turned human time into neighbor time. You take comfort in the idea that sound means someone cares about where something is. Even if that something is a sheep that confuses philosophy with shrubbery, the pads return and stop again and you recognize the rhythm of watching, not stalking. Wolves are accountants of opportunity, the forester said, and you are not presently a line item, which suits you. Another fringe detail pushes in with smoke on its hem. A shepherd once told you he stitched a wolf tooth to a child's belt against nightmares, and that goats dislike the smell of iron but love the sound of pans. So he clanged an old skillet to nudge a flock where a dog could not. You never verified the goat's preferences, but the skillet story has the ding of truth. You let your own skillet analog. The lantern's tiny door. Clack once, gently, not as a challenge but as a courtesy note. The bell answers like a neighbor tapping a wall to say yes. Hello, still here. The downhill breathes cold, and with it comes the long song you hoped not to hear and are relieved to finally meet. A low howl sliding up like a violin that forgot to wear shoes. Not close, a county away in feeling, but clear. It treks across your spine with the polite firmness of a schoolmaster's finger and leaves your shoulders taller than you usually wear them. You do not run because running is a language with too many verbs. You do not freeze because statues rarely cross causeways. You walk, a state of being that suits most stories and this one especially. You think of the green men carved in lintels and on oak burls, faces half leaf and half laugh, and you wonder whether the artist meant to say, remember you are seen. But not necessarily hunted. You stay in that thought like a soft cloak. You adjust your pack so no buckle taps. Remember the charcoaler's taboo that sound is part of fuel. And you keep your breathing steady. Humor, which has not abandoned you, submits a memo. Joke 3. If the wolves ask for references you will list the forester's hound and the ferryman's oar, both of whom can attest you are chewy but not worth the paperwork. The howl folds back into rustle and notes, and you feel the hush after music, the place where people in churches forget whether to clap. You choose gratitude and let your shoulders settle one notch. The path rises slightly and the air loses some of its iron taste, replaced by beach tea and old rain. You stop once to let silence pass you going the other way, then follow it. The bell moves again, closer now but not toward you. You picture a shepherd with a cloak turned inside out, laughing later at his own superstition while it secretly helps. You file this under harmless tactics alongside red thread and nails named Saint. Don't be foolish. Your staff translates another boggy syllable into a detour and you obey. Memory of the hanging snare in your ribs keeping time with caution. The night keeps its ledger in glints. A snail shell, a slug gleam, a bead of sap, each an index of small lives that do not need your story but are willing to share a page. You think of the monks you imagined by river wheels, bread and beer and the wheel's soft sermon, and you add a steady certainty. Bells also measured prayers. The bell you hear might be a hermit's hour or a flock's. Either way, someone counted so that time would feel kept. Historians still debate whether the so-called Great Wildwood once smothered lands in unbroken green or whether the medieval world was always a patchwork of pasture, hedge, and coppice. Your day's teacher voted for patchwork, and night, with its wolf song embroidery and bell stitching, seems to second the motion. You find a beech root that makes a bench and borrow it. Not to linger, to lengthen your breath, you keep the lantern slit narrow. The cheese parcel ready in case honesty requires a second course. You test the nails with a fingertip as a person touches a pocket gospel, 3 cool commas between sentences you would prefer not to lengthen with panic. Then you rise. You had promised yourself that tonight you would keep going until a certain leaning Esh appeared, the one whose hollow tasted of honey, and when it does, you accept the reward of a known thing in a night of inventories. You touch its bark, slide the lantern's grin across its hollow, and listen inside. the soft drift of something small, mouse or air. You wish it well, you hope the wolves already ate their fear and will not need yours. The bell moves away. The pads do not return, or return where you cannot tell they do. And you walk the last runnel of dark as if you were pulling a thread that will hem the evening. Your feet learn a new habit, pausing half a beat before each step as if the ground had asked for courtesy and gotten it. Tomorrow will have pilgrims. If the outline of lanterns in your memory is correct, scallop shells on hats that turn travelers into lighthouses small enough to carry. For now, the lesson writes itself cleanly. The forest can sing with teeth and still let you pass if you keep your edges wrapped and your sound small. You thank the night out loud. Once, whole hand open so no one thinks you hide a blade. The air files your gratitude somewhere, a bell will find it later. And you continue 1 foot, then the next, carrying red thread, 3 bent saints, a cheese treaty, and a promise to walk like a guest until morning signs the attendance book in light. You notice them first as fireflies pretending to have budgets, little lanterns bobbing on the path like coins tossed onto dark water. And then the murmurs resolve into lines of prayer stitched with place names, saint names, bridge names, a geography made out of promises and sore feet. Scallop shells wink from hats and cloak pins, some polished like moons, some dull as old tin. And you recognize the emblem from 1,000 carvings. Mainstream fact arriving with the confidence of a choir. Pilgrims bound for Santiago de Compostela wore the scallop as their badge. The way to St. James mapped by shells as much as milestones. Pewter badges of every shrine were sold by the handful, Thomas Becket's especially. So many that centuries later the Thames still gives them up like change from history's pocket. The first pilgrim to reach you lifts his staff and shows you a tangle of cords knotted with lengths of road measured by rumor. He says the knots remember where his knees forgot. His neighbor hushes him and asks if the forester's ride is in a civil mood. And you show your tally with the ferryman's red thread and the forester's cross like a passport stamped by water and bark. The pilgrims exhale as if a small saint has signed the night. Joke one slips on your tongue, and you set it gently down. You tell them your cheese treaty with the forester's hound is still honored in this parish, and that you are current on truth payments. Laughter moves through the group the way heat moves through bread, softening everything. They sort themselves around you like geese when a new wind starts. And a woman in a felt hat taps her scallop shell and says she uses it as a spoon at rivers because saints appreciate practicality. Fringe detail plants its flag. Another says she ties red thread on milestones so the road will not forget her name before morning. You nod at the thread because you know that color by water and fire, and law sticks, the leader, a man with a badge that looks like a tiny church roof, explains their plan in the humble declarative mood of tired people. Follow the relic route to the chapel ruin. Turn where the yew roots grip the wall like old hands. Keep the ditch on the left until the ground smells of iron, not old rain. Then angle to the ferry that is not a ferry but a ford. There is debate about the ford, he admits, because yesterday it was a rumor that became a mud hole that became a rumor again. Historians still debate whether medieval pilgrimage was mostly thunderous and crowded, a river of penance and trade and flirtation rolling across Europe, or whether most people stayed near their parishes and the grand roads were for a few. Scholars write numbers like beads and argue if journeys were piety, tourism, commerce, or practical errands wrapped in prayer. Your ears carry both sides, the shells you can touch and the uncertainty you can respect. The woman with the shell spoon listens to the forest as if waiting for it to interrupt. Nothing interrupts, so the column forms, you walking at the shoulder where doubts usually ride, your lantern a narrow whisper so as not to brag to the trees. The path is solid enough for 6 dozen steps and then experiences a crisis of identity. Dissolving from track to suggestion to participle to mud. Rumor thickens like fog. Everyone halts and the murmurs fray into versions. Left at the oak that looks like a man or the man who looks like an oak, past the stone with a cross that might be lichen doing theater, or straight on until a broken bridge that is more philosophy than timber. You remember the forester's rule that walking marks the line as much as stones do. and you feel a small shiver where certainty usually keeps its hat. Joke 2 checks in with a polite cough. You propose flipping a coin and then recall that the coin you have is 3 bent nails. Named Saint Bracket, Saint Hinge, and Saint Don't Be Foolish. The crowd appreciates the saints and the joke buys you patience. You kneel and let the ground brief you. Heat breath, a hint of iron, water close but not bragging. The charcoalers taught you that fuel speaks if you listen by the right vent. So you press your palm on the moss and address the soil as if it were a clerk. Which way to the ford that used to be a ferry, clerk? The soil promotes you to citizen by remaining helpful in silence. Then a pilgrim child offers a less mystical instrument, a bundle of willow twigs tied with red thread. He calls it a pathfinder and swings it lightly. Fringed to the edge of superstition, you let him point with the whole hand the charcoaler recommended, and the twigs lean toward a dip where the smell does become iron. Cautious hope puts on boots, you test with your staff, priestly again, and the ground answers with the squelch dialect you still decline to learn. You draw back. Let the column breathe and try your ferryman trick, telling a story the road will want to agree with. You name the yew-walled chapel, the ditch, the iron smell, the bank of rush like a shepherd's haircut. You say it quietly as if to avoid waking the snare memory in your ribs. And the pilgrims lean toward the description until the world seems to choose alignment. The column bends left, away from the mud rumor, and finds a bank that holds like a patient elder. Someone behind you begins a hymn low enough not to make charcoal sulk. The words are plain bread. Let us pass, keep us between stones and water. We will try to deserve the favor. You discover you can sing in the key of respectful. The lanterns float like a rosary of glow worms. You keep your pauses half a beat long to let water reveal itself before ankles do. Mainstream detail clicks a bead into place in your mind. The 12th century Codex Calixtinus included a guide for pilgrims to Compostela, naming roads and rivers and cautions with the confidence of someone who has learned geography by blisters. But here you must write your own codex with staff taps and breath. The path resumes as if embarrassed, and the air changes from wet wool to iron pot, which means you are trending correctly toward the ford rumor. The leader with the church roof badge raises a hand, and you all stop at once like well-trained horses. Beyond the alders a gloss of water lies shallow over stones, making a sound like a tailor murmuring at a seam. The ford exists just enough to permit belief, which is most of what a ford needs to do. You test with your staff, then knee, then a modestly brave ankle, and the clatter of pebbles under water comes as a polite applause. Joke 3 wanders by and tips its hat. If the ferryman appears and charges admission for crossing without him, you will pay in gratitude and the last of your cheese. The pilgrims cross in twos, shells glinting like domestic stars, and the night registers your progress with the bookkeeping of small sounds. One woman stops halfway and dips her scallop, drinks, wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, and tells you saints prefer witnesses who hydrate. The ford finishes without incident and rumor loses its case, which rumor often does when faced with evidence and determined ankles. On the far bank the path takes the shape of intention again, and you breathe as if you had been holding a pot lid this whole time. The woman with the shell spoon sidles up and asks if you really carry nails named after grammar. You confess the names, and she confesses she once sewed a feather in her hem, so the wind would remember her and not push her into bogs. Fringe detail keeps expanding its wardrobe, and you are happy to be in fashion. She tells you how hospices along some routes stamp a traveler's leaf with marks, and though this parish is shabby on stamps, memories can press just as deep when the stamping tool is mud and good company. Somewhere behind you a voice recites the list of shrines the way bakers recite ingredients. Saints Mary's de la Mer, Will Snack, Rocamadour, Cologne for the Magi if the season favors roads, Canterbury if you want a badge shaped like a bishop being inconvenient to swords. The child with the willow bundle asks if your bent nails are for trading, and you say not for coin, for reminders. He seems satisfied because children understand that a reminder sometimes feeds a day better than money. The column slows where the trees thicken and swallow starlight, and the leader makes the hard call to camp cold. No proud flame in sleeping woods. Charcoaler grammar enforced, everyone nods. And the hush that follows is not empty. It is full of people unburdening sacks and pain and small jokes. You sit on a root polished by anonymous sitters and breathe in the evening the way a reader leans into a good paragraph. The pilgrims share rind and crust and the sort of talk that oils knees, and you offer what you can, a story about a hanging snare, the respectful way to talk to rope. The lesson that even a fern can catch you with kindness. Your audience hums with recognition because every traveler has been kindly caught by bread, by direction, by a stranger who did not have to be helpful. Mainstream fact returns with its steady lantern. Great roads like the Via Francigena carried souls toward Rome and past abbeys that knew how to count beds as well as beads, monasteries and hospitals of the Order of Street. John housed the weary and washed feet as if the Messiah might be hiding in a blister. The woman with the shell says she was once turned away and slept in a sheepfold, and that the sheep made excellent pillows until they stood up like a single opinion and left her on the ground. You savor the image and pocket it with other gentle proofs that survival can be funny. Then someone asks what your own relic will be when you return, proof for the reeve with the lemon peel smile. You touch the tally, the red threads, the forester's cross, and answer that your proof is being able to name the U-walled chapel that smells of iron and the ford that stopped being a rumor for 5 minutes and the exact place where a child's willow twigs leaned toward mercy. And your voice surprises you by sounding like rest. The column drowses one person at a time, lantern slits closing to commas. And you take the watch the way a person accepts a book already warm from someone else's hand. The path may again attempt to dissolve at dawn, but you will pour it back into shape with the quiet metal of names and the patient grammar of your staff. You trace a small scallop in the dirt with a nail head and think, not for luck, but for alignment. For remembering the road is a living thing that likes to be thanked when it holds. The forest lets you keep that thought. And the night does not argue with your counting so long as you count silently. So you do, gratitude by the breath, until the first bird considers whether it is worth announcing morning and decides to write a draft you will approve when light arrives. You wake to a dew that edits everything into italics and decide today belongs to moss, because last night promised iron and paths that behave, and morning likes to prove you gullible. You kneel at the first beech, stroke its green beard, and announce respectfully that you are here to read. Moss nods with the confidence of an authority who has not yet been questioned. Joke one clears its throat. You tell yourself the old proverb. Moss grows on the north side, and then add the footnote you have already earned, unless it prefers the stream or the prevailing wind, or the side goats can't scratch. You carry the charcoaler's quiet, the forester's arithmetic, the pilgrim's shells, and the ferryman's red thread in your pockets, and put on the air of a librarian visiting another librarian. The trunk accepts your attention without promising any particular truth. You look where sunlight has not argued much, where bark keeps a steady damp, and you choose a direction, north by narrative. The path follows as if it, too, enjoys a story. Mainstream fact arrives with its tidy satchel. By the late 12th century, European writers knew the magnetic needle. Alexander Neckham wrote of sailors using a lodestone-touched iron needle to find north when stars hid. The needle floating on water or pivoting on a pin, a little miracle that turned confusion into arithmetic. You speak this aloud to your breath because even a forest likes to hear that humans sometimes invent helpful toys. But you have no needle, only the old green syllabus at eye level and a staff that knows where bogs keep their opinions. You try chapter 2 of Moss Studies. Find 3 trees in a row and plot which faces are most luxuriantly carpeted. You draw a line with your eyes that becomes a guess, which becomes confidence by repetition. Confidence improves walking, and walking can look like correctness if you do not check. Historians still debate whether medieval travelers on land used compasses in any number. Beyond sailors and scholars scribbling treatises, the manuscripts whisper sea more often than hedge. Some argue that parish folk navigated by sun, slope, track memory, and talk, and saved lodestones for merchants on big water. Others point to portable needles and say surely some feet learned their trick. You vote for talk and track and a dash of private needles. Then remember that your own needle is moss wearing certainty like a borrowed hat. The slope of the valley begins to twist the wind, and the moss agrees with the wind like a politician courting a new parish. Your north rotates, politely 60 degrees. Then 20, and your inner map whistles as if to look casual. Fringe detail volunteers a tool, and you test it because humor and desperation share a pocket. Some woodland folks swear that anthills open on the warm side so the colony can sun its doorway. South, if the day behaves, you crouch, admire a construction that looks like a tiny cathedral made of pins and patience, and compare its porch to the moss that is right unless wrong. The ants do not file orientation drawings, but the slope does have a southern swagger. You add it to your chorus of clues, joke 2 waves of flag. You consider writing a handbook titled Orienting for people who talk nicely to invertebrates. Then downgrade that to a pamphlet when you remember how often pamphlets survive while grand books become mouse wallpaper. The track you trust becomes persuasive again. Firmer underfoot, bounded by hazel coppice that remembers hands, and your feet forgive you one error in exchange for not stepping into yesterday's kind of rope. You test each new moss pronouncement against water's secret grammar, where the runnels choose to gather, where sedge thickens like a tired eyebrow, and you let water outrank fuzz when they disagree. A rook complains somewhere like a will needing grease. You answer with a whole hand apology and keep going. The day lengthens into a kind of pale pewter, your favorite color for decisions because it keeps them polite. You pass a stump where someone has knotted red thread. 3 turns, a quiet spell for not getting lost. You nod to the thread as if to a cousin in a crowd and feel less alone in your private debate with chlorophyll. A clearing as large as a cloak opens and offers mushrooms that look exactly like mistakes. You decline culinary courage and eat bread instead. Crumbs for saints real and invented, the bent nails in your pouch, Saint Bracket, Saint Hinge, and Saint Don't Be Foolish. Talk softly with each step like a pocket metronome for patience. Their weight reminds you that law counts things and the forest counts things, and your job is to count breaths and not insist on heroics. You try a sun trick as insurance. Hold a stick upright. Mark the tip's shadow, wait a few breaths, mark again. Watch the shadow retreat east and draw your line west to east. North perpendicular, tidy as a copybook. The charcoalers would approve the silence with which you perform this, and the forester would approve the part where you do not pretend speed outranks accuracy. You align your moss with sun's proof and feel like a small committee reaching consensus after snacks. Mainstream detail knocks again with a gentle knuckle. Churches in the Latin West were often oriented roughly east. Ad orientem, priest facing sunrise, though foundations and ground and local ideas tugged the compass around. So a church's chancel points more toward devotion than true east. Useful if you find one, less useful if the roof remembered to be gone. You suspect a roofless chapel is near because the pilgrims spoke of you roots gripping stones like old hands, and because ruins attract paths like bees find time. But you do not skip ahead. Today is Moss Day, and Moss still wishes to debate. The valley turns its head. The air cools, and your north issues a new opinion. You refuse to be insulted. You adjust. You audit the ants again and consult the sedge. The staff taps each choice like a clerk initialing margins. Joke 3. You inform the nearest tree that you are the sort of person who admits when he is being gently corrected by plants. The tree withholds comment. You remember the hanging snare and the way ferns can be kind. And you add to your rule set, kindness in plants is often structural, not intentional, but it counts. You make kindness structural too by pausing where birds scold and letting them finish their editorial before you proceed. The ground rises to a lip that would be a ridge if it were prouder. And on the far side, the runnels loosen into a net that glitters where sun threads through. Water lays a left hand parting in the grass. Wind combs a right hand one in the moss. The two create a crosshatch you can read like a household ledger. You lean on that, heavier than on green beards alone. The air picks up a faint sweetness, bruised apple or crushed ivy, and then the iron taste walks back into your mouth as if to ask whether you have learned anything since yesterday. You smile into it because answering yes out loud would bruise the charcoalers to booze. In a shallow bowl of ground you find a scatter of pebbles polished more than neighboring stones. Proof that feet drifted here before yours. You honor the unknown feet with a half bow. Then lift your head because a different shade of green is clustered ahead. You think the color of bottled dusk, but you refuse to have found a chapel yet. Not until the moss agrees with the ants, agrees with the water, agrees with the sun, agrees with the way birds fall quiet when walls remember prayers. Scholars argue all the same about whether the proverb of moss on north began as fieldcraft or schoolroom simplification. Some trace it to northern writers assembling handy lore lists. Others say it is an old observation made helpful by repetition, and then a lie when carted into every valley indiscriminately. You will testify for both sides, helpful in company with other clues. Liar when appointed sheriff alone. You test one last trunk and the moss, generous at last, point steady as if embarrassed by earlier flirtations. You let yourself be guided. The staff finds a subsidence that tastes like sill stone. Under soil, a straightness where nature prefers curves. And your breath shortens with that pleasant anxiety people feel when their guest prepares to take off its costume and reveal a fact. Fringe detail trots back to escort the moment. An old swineherd once told you that when you feel lost you should hum the Kyrie at a speed that fits your walk. Not for heaven's ear but for your own. So you keep your steps in a kind of mercy, your pulse in a kind of patience, and the tune keeps you from hurrying at the exact wrong time. A rook breaks off from its complaint and flies ahead to a shape not entirely tree. You stop because stopping is still grammar. One beat, two, then move because movement is still meaning. The ewes become themselves dark and elder, and between their skirts something pale surfaces like bone under skin. Ashlar, a corner, a line mortared by hands that believed in roofs. You let the image occupy only the edge of your eye because this chapter is still moss. The next will be wall. And you keep promises to structure as if it were a person you respect. The path here has been kept by feet and goats and perhaps an annual procession that forgot to come last spring. Your nails tick the pouch as if to ask whether this counts as a hinge moment. St. Hinge grants provisional approval. Joke 4 asks permission to submit a lesson. If you ever get to write the terms and conditions of forests, include a clause saying every proverb must travel with 3 friends. Sun, slope, and stream, else it rides outside the cart. You think this fair? The moss around the ewes is uncommonly shy, giving way to bare earth where parishioners once turned the same corners. Until the soil remembered, you pet one last patch of green and thank it for being a guide who tolerates being wrong in public. Then look up fully, not to enter, simply to let your eyes accept that. A chapel wall without a roof waits within the trees. The morning has spent you gently, and you have spent the morning learning that certainty breathes best when it shares the room. You settle your pack, make a whole hand greeting to the shade, and leave the last foot of discovery for the next breath, which is to say for the next chapter you have promised yourself. You step once more to fix your place in the ledger of the ground. And the moss, magnanimous now that the hard work is over, declines to contradict you. You stand at the lip of the U-shade and let the pale geometry ahead collect you. Wall without roof, corner with memory, ashlar stones stacked like folded prayers, and a doorway that still remembers shoulders. You keep the lantern slit thin because ruins prefer confidences to headlines. The ewes lean like elders' eaves dropping on grandchildren. Needles writing a quiet italic over everything. You step where feet once turned, and your soles find the polished curve a congregation leaves by doing the same motion until soil agrees. In the nave of air a swallow scythes through. Perfectly entitled to inherit whatever roof the sky can offer, you move as the charcoalers taught you, soft-footed, and as the forester advised, whole-hand greetings to stones. You speak a name to steady yourself, Grange. The word fits the scale better than chapel alone. A farm place of an abbey where lay brothers once shouldered the barns and winter plans. Mainstream fact slides in with calm authority. Cistercian houses built outlying granges worked by conversy. Lay brothers under monastic rule who plowed, brewed, herded, and tallied. Their complexes often held tithe barns with big doors for wagon mouths and little owl holes so feathered accountants could thin the mice. You angle your lantern to a slit near the gable stump, and there it is, an owl's doorway carved like a modest moon, and beneath it, scratch marks that could be claws, could be knives, could be calendars. Your breath files this as proof that grain once slept here under a feathered tax inspector. Fringe detail steps forward with charm and caution. On a sill someone long ago scored a round hexafoil, a daisy will meant to confuse ill luck into chasing its own lines. And in the corner hangs a threadbare plate of last year's straw, the ghost of a corn dolly, the harvest spirit stashed for safekeeping until the first sheaf of the new season could invite it home. You touch nothing because touching would feel like editing, and you are here to read. Joke one blinks awake and you hush it, promising you will not nominate yourself as head librarian of ruins until you have earned at least 2 mouse bites of experience. In a side cell, the floor stays cooler, the kind of cool that knows ledger ink, and you imagine a strongbox, a chest with 3 keys for 3 hands so that debts would require company to open. You remember the Reeves lemon peel smile and the half-charter on the ferry post hedgehogged with nails, and you feel how a paper promise grows brick ribs here, debts in heaps of barley, in stacks of hay, in winter measured by whether the oxen's hips looked like tight fists or relaxed palms. Inside the doorway, a post socket keeps a bruise where a beam once turned like a jaw. Above it, a lintel has a green face warping out of the grain, a cousin to the foliate men that kept peering at you on the road, their meaning an infinite tavern argument, fertility charm, seasonal joke, sermon in wood, or just a carver's wink. Historians still debate whether such faces are pagan echoes, wearing church hats or simple ornament grown into folklore by repetition. And you let the debate float because the swallow does not require your conclusion to continue her shift. You pace the nave of air and your staff taps a stone with a sound that tastes like money. Your ears know a floor laid for wagons, wide for turnings, the kind of space where back-breaking becomes choreography. You see it as if now lay brothers shouldering sacks, a hired boy handing up sheaves, a ledger man with black-stained thumb licking each page into performance, a bell somewhere telling lungs and knees when to change gears. You pass under the ghost of a loft and think of shoulders carrying all the invisible stuff a year needs to become a winter that does. Not panic, mainstream certainty adds its bead. Tithe barns stored the 10th part owed to church or lord, measured in modii and quarters, sometimes chalked in tallies, sometimes cut into sticks that split so both parties carry proof like a pair of ribs. You still carry your ferryman's notch with red thread and the forester's cross in the same pocket as your 3 bent saints, and you feel how one small line can stand up in a room full of bigger ones. Joke 2 peaks around a pillar that no longer exists, and you tell it gently that if you try to organize this place, your ranking system will eventually include buckets of dust. Subcategory heroic, and you do not have the staffing. The U's breathe and the ruin answers in tiny echoes. You read the wall by touch, shallow cuts that might have been numerals, lines where the plaster wore a calendar of tool marks, and a faint red smear near eye height, iron-based paint maybe, or thumb rubs from work hands. You lower your palm and find a crack with the sharpness of a complaint, the kind of line frost writes when it is disappointed in mortar. And there, tucked into the seam, a dried blue thread, not ferryman red but the color of a sky shorn of cloud. You leave it. You have learned that threads have jurisdiction and your job is to observe, not promote. A rook rides the air like a correction mark, and you remember a sober truth that belongs here. Hard years knock on doors until they are answered by fewer loaves. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 rode a procession of wet seasons, crops souring under rain, beasts thinning to shadows, and grain stores failing families before the calendar did. Some ate bark and worse, court records and chronicles stacked the sorrow. And if a grange like this stood, then it would have learned the sound of hunger talking through men who barely moved. You keep your voice low because facts like that echo easily. And your throat has earned its share of empty noises. There is a harder question that still rustles among the learned like dry straw. Historians still debate whether scarcity alone starved people or whether speculation and hoarding braided with. Whether to tighten the knot. Some accounts call merchants wolves. Others show abbeys and lords easing rents and opening barns. The record is patchwork, like the forest itself. Boar and barley, thorn and altar, and your own thought refuses to flatten it. You follow a shadowed corridor to a doorpost with little notches at child height. They could be idle knife work, they could be measures for growing, they could be wishes. You picture lay brothers with smoke in their wool teaching hired youths the liturgy of grain, how to pile so air can breathe, how to lay threshing floors with straw like soft armor, how to pray without making a spectacle of it. A lesson the charcoalers would agree with. A sudden sweetness climbs from a corner, honey, faint and old as a bedtime story, and you remember the ash hollow that tasted of it, and imagine a skep sitting under the eaves here once. Bees making a treaty with the barn the way the forester makes treaties with pigs. In a recess a scatter of pebbles glints, a labor of bored hands perhaps, or a game of merrills scratched into a convenient slab to pass winter twilights. The board is 9 men's Morris if your memory attends, and you kneel, touch the little grid, and feel how work builds empty minutes that deserve kindness. Fringe lore taps your sleeve. An elder once told you that some farmers buried a toad in the threshold of a granary to draw away damp and weevils, a story you choose to respect without testing. And another swore that hanging a horse skull in a roof made the barn sing the rat quieting note. Perhaps the skulls are absent and the note remains. Your ear cannot hear it, but the owl doorway suggests someone kept the balance with wings instead of bones. The place has that hum of many lives, layered thin until they make a warm blanket. Joke 3 leans its chin on its palm and asks if your bent saints have patronage over not sticking your nose into cubbyholes where a mouse might file a lawsuit. You pat Saint don't be foolish and accept his counsel. In the apse ghost a mold line rims the stone where damp wants to be altar cloth. And within that rim a little chalk star repeats the 6 petals. You saw on the sill, you read it as a charm left not against devils but against damp arithmetic, the sort that turns a winter of 6 loaves into 5.5. In the sacristy ghost a peg still holds its patience, and you imagine a habit or a smock hanging, sweet with smoke and soapwort, waiting for a shoulder that will not come back. You test the floor the way the forester taught. Staff first, breath second, pride last, and the peat memory in the clay approves your order. Beyond the east wall, a yew-root grips a fallen block like a hand refusing to drop a burden. You press your palm to the cool and let your pulse slow into it. And in that slowing room the best kind of fact settles, the sort that is felt before counted. These places turned miles and muscle into liturgy, tally sticks into bread. A year into a winter that did not have to taste of fear every evening, you lower yourself to a knee and lift your gaze to the sky roof, and for a moment the ruin feels finished because the swallows have taken the rafters for an hour and stitched them perfectly from flight. Your pockets inventory themselves of their own accord, red thread, ferryman's notch, forester's cross, 3 bent nails, a corner of cheese kept for bureaucrats with good noses. And you realize you have arrived here with the right grammar for walking and the right appetite for listening. Joke 4 strolls across the nave. You promise to return the corn dolly to its hook if it leaps down and asks you to. On balance, an unlikely event, but professional courtesy matters in multipurpose temples. You rise and take a slow tour along the outside where Bramble has written a commentary too long for this edition, and you find, almost hidden, a narrow slot that once let air comb the barley noses. Its edges rubbed smoother than stone has any right to be by sack after sack brushing past. You bow to that smoothness, the way you bowed to the sapling the forester asked you to greet for future shade. Because these are the saints of stay warm, of soup with potatoes, of bed not empty. And you prefer their miracles humble and well-practiced. At the far corner a flat stone lies like a table that forgot its legs, and on it sits a scatter of beans turned to stone by time. or pebbles that mistook themselves for beans by shape and hope. You put none in your mouth because you do not want to meet a legend by choking on it. But you let the sight write a little hope on your ribs. You pass the threshold to leave and pause the way a person does after a good conversation. You look back, not to take inventory again, but to let the room look at you, to be seen by stone that remembers how to keep a promise even after roofs forget. Historians still debate whether granges like this were mostly manned by conversi in their heyday and then shifted to hired labor and tenants after the 13th century's changes, vocations thinning, economics pivoting, abbeys counting differently. You can almost hear the counting changing in these walls like music modulating, and you accept that buildings carry more than one kind of history in the same skin. Outside, the yews release a few soft needles and the light peels itself off the stone like old paint. You thank the place with your whole hand. You promise not to tell a story that makes it smaller, and you tuck your lantern's grin down to a thoughtful line. On the way back to the track you notice a boundary stone someone has daubed with a faint circle of ochre. Not bright, just a whisper, and a thread. This one blue knotted there. You nod to the new cousin of your red, and carry the gentle knowledge that hoarded grain and hoarded mercy both live better when the doors stay open to honest owls. You shoulder your pack, feel the three bent saints knock softly like knuckles at a known door, and set your steps to the old shelf of ground where wagons turned. 1 foot, then the next, leaving the barn of sky to the swallows for now while you return to the ledger of trees. You leave the grange with its owl doorway and corn dolly ghost and let the path smooth itself into a whisper, yews giving way to beech fading to birch, and your lantern keeping it slit like a secret you are saving for a better listener. The ground exhales into a shallow green bowl, a glade brushed flat by wind and careful hooves, and there he is, pale as milk on pewter, a stag standing in profile with antlers like a winter orchard drawn in ink. He tilts his head as if nodding to your better self. And hunger, which had been reciting arguments about bread and the last of your cheese, pauses mid-syllable to check the minutes. You make the whole hand greeting you have learned, because pointing pricks and you would rather earn courtesy than weather it. The stag keeps chewing the air, or so it looks, mouth working on invisible leaves, and then he lowers, rises, a small bow that could be flies, could be habit, could be omen practicing stagecraft. Joke 1 asks if this is the part where you accept a royal quest and forget lunch. You tell your joke that your stomach has veto power on fairy law. Still you step half a pace forward into the grammar of meeting, soft sols, lantern shy, staff low as a priest in a hurry. The charcoalers would approve the quiet fuel of your body. The forester would approve that you have no proud fire and your nails named Saint Bracket, Saint Hinge. And Saint Don't Be Foolish sit steady in your pouch like commas guarding against rash clauses. The stag's coat is not quite white, more the color of fog caught on thistles, and you recall a mainstream stitch of heraldry and alehouse memory. Richard II took the white hart as his badge. A collared deer on livery coats and in signs, and England sprouted white harts enough that centuries later you can still drink under the emblem and argue about the ale's honesty. Kings loved deer as law loved fines. Venison reserved for people who embroidered their names on the year. You think of that law and of your earlier boar lesson and feel how much appetite requires paperwork. The stag tilts again and walks 2 ceremonious steps, not fleeing, not approaching, the speed of a thought showing itself twice so you will believe it. Your breath stretches to meet the moment, and you lay the ferryman's red thread across it in your mind like a bookmark. Follow the deer and find a chapel, story warns, or follow the deer and find a bog, experience counters. You taste the iron in the air where water thinks aloud under the grass and recall the forester's quiet counsel. If your staff dislikes a step, honor its mood. You test. The ground hums yes in the syllable affirm, and the stag nods again as if accepting your audition. Historians still debate whether white stags in medieval stories signal divine summons, Celtic memory, or a literary magnet for knights who needed excuses to leave supper. Some trace the motif from Irish and Welsh tales into Arthurian forests, where pursuit of a white hart shreds courtly seating charts and builds quests from hoofprints. Others insist the color is less miracle than leucism, rare but real, and the meaning followed the deer. Not the other way, you do not solve the paper argument in a glade. You simply agree that wonder can wear antlers and statistics at once. The stag steps sideways, a polite invitation drawn with hooves, and you, who have followed bells, smoke, and moss before, try not to be the kind of person who ignores a courteous guide. You angle after him, staff testing, breath quiet, a pilgrim rhythm without the shells. Moss plays librarian again on north-facing trunks and gets it mostly right until water edits it. You reconcile competing experts like a reeve sorting two ledgers and a rumor. The stag stops at the glade's far lip and lowers his head fully now, one front knee dipping until the antlers point. Like a chandelier rehearsing a bow, he drinks from a hoofprint-wide dish of water you would not have seen if you had been taller. Fringe detail flits in. There is a story some keep tucked behind. The respectable ones. That water pooled in a stag's track cures a fever. If you do not brag to the fever about the cure, you do not test it. Your fever is only the kind that bred moderates. But you mark the print's place because cataloging kindness is a habit now. A rook, loyal as a punctuation mark, complains from a birch and the stag flicks an ear without promoting the rook to a plot. Your stomach votes again and the ballot reads cheese. You laugh in your throat and break a corner. The treaty food you keep for hounds and sudden negotiations with reality half vanishes into your mouth, half returns to the pouch to warn destiny you are still armed with dairy. The stag watches the motion, not covetous, just witness, like Stone did at the Grange, and when you take another step he takes one too. Like the low tide in a polite conversation. You recall the hanging snare and its fern mercy and make a new rule on the fly. Never follow antlers faster than you can apologize to ground. The lantern gives a fraction more grin to honor. Shadows patience and your staff taps a submerged sill of soil that used to be a boundary for something that is not here. You trace its angle with a boot and remember tapping lichen-bitten parish. Stones, attendance taken by walking. As the forester told you, the stag tilts his muzzle toward a stand of hazel where the coppice stools wear rings like seasoned advice, and you imagine him saying, "This way is story, that way is soup, choose well, joke 2 votes soup," because story rarely packs a nap. You compromise by following story toward something that looks like soup. Your feet straight line through buttercups and the earth accepts you as if your name is finally on the right list. Mainstream truth nods in. Medieval hunts were choreographies with horns, hounds, relays, and rank-based honors. The curie for the dogs a ritual, the allotment of haunches a syllabus in venison. And tapestries made a theater of it so high walls could keep winter company with fabric countryside. You prefer a single deer in a real glade and no tapestries unless moss counts. The stag takes another ceremonial swallow and rises. A proper bow, you mirror it without antlers, whole hand open, and you are very aware that he can leave any time and you cannot, not unless you invent speed. He turns as if to go and then pauses, looking toward a low stripe of darker green, alder telling secrets about a stream. You hear the water before you see the metal it has polished into taste. The stag walks. You walk, your staff translates squelch into a detour, and you enter a corridor of reed where flies audition for irritation and fail because your shins forgive them. The stag stops in the water, just above the knee, and breathes. As if making an offering of presents to the stream, you consider washing the bent nails, a symbolic courtesy to Saint Hinge and company. Then imagine dropping them and build a countervailing ritual, in which you keep hold. The ferryman's knot shows in your mind. Red wool against willow, and steadiness spreads through your palm as if thread could be learned by skin. Your lantern's grin shuts entirely now because sunlight has remembered its job. And in that wider light you notice a notch on the far bank. A narrowing where hooves and feet have written their crossing like a sentence rewritten often until it runs. A ford, one of those rumors that prefer the daylight. You could cross, you could not. You think of the pilgrims and their shell spoon, the way a crowd made water agreeable by agreeing, and decide you do not need to cross today to honor the idea that this is crossable. You drink instead, learning again the charcoaler's lesson that thirst is a poor advisor until it meets water and becomes policy. The stag drinks too, then lifts water from his muzzle like a brief beard and shakes philosophy from his chin. Historians still debate whether people saw white deer as the forest's private herald or as a neighbor wearing an unusual coat. Parish records are thin on antler omens, thick on finds, and chronicles do not always stop to say what most folks thought on cold Tuesdays. You side with Tuesdays, omen if you need one, animal if you can manage it. Mercy either way, the stag lifts one foreleg and stamps, not alarmed, just punctuation, and in the stamp a beetle blunders into the open, antlered too, a stag beetle with mandibles like old cutlery. Fringe lore taps your shoulder to brag that in parts of Germany. People once said these beetles carried burning coals in their jaws to set thatch alight at witches' request. You watch this one lug a crumb of wood with the dignity of a tiny carpenter and decide. He is employed by no one but necessity. The stag steps out, climbs the bank as if stairs had remembered him, and pauses, front hoof lifted. The bow again, subtle, funny, holy, an itch disguised as benediction. Joke 3 bows back, you are tempted to ask for an autograph, but the licensing terms on antlers are famously intricate. Your hunger returns as a reasonable citizen after a brief pilgrimage to meaning, so you sit where his knees made commas in the grass and you eat, not hurried, not reverent, simply with the steady gratitude that replaces rhetoric when bread cooperates. A rook applauds once with a wooden hinge and you take that as a review that will not be syndicated. You think of how often the world nodded at you in the last days. The ferryman's hat, the forester's almost smile, the charcoaler's vent pegs, the pilgrim's shells, the yew roots tugging stone, the moss that lied kindly until it told the truth. And you realize the stag's bow joins those nods, all of them small permissions to keep being a guest. You finish, wipe your fingers on a grass sentence, and stand with your whole weight in a habit of listening. The stag has moved to the glade's rim and dissolves into trees one branch at a time, white becoming birch, birch becoming light, light becoming something you cannot inventory. Your staff touches the ground in thanks, and you hear yourself promise aloud that you will not tell a story that steals the animal in order to rent the omen. The forest files your statement in a drawer marked "See if they keep it." You exhale, check the pouch, red thread, tally stick, cross, 3 saints, a last shard of cheese for bureaucrats with wet noses, and turn down glade toward the alder's shade, because you remember there are boundary stones to tap in a whispering edge to find, and because omen does not outrank hunger, but it does adjust your posture. You walk like a person who was seen by a thing that does not need you, which is calming, sanity's favorite tempo. The lantern rides quiet, your shoes solve leaf algebra. And when wind shivers the beech leaves into applause, you accept it as overgenerous but not hostile. In your pocket, the bent nails tick, commas becoming a small metronome. And you keep time with them, 1 foot, then the next, letting the stag's bow fold itself into your spine like a well-placed page marker that says here, yes, keep reading. You leave the glade where the stag folded himself into trees, and the ground gradually changes its grammar from stream talk to law talk. The path hardens. Your staff begins to strike stone with a sound that thinks in lines, and then you see the first of them, a shoulder-high lump in a small congregation of lumps, lichen-bitten faces with the patient look of parish clerks who have outlived everyone they filed. Boundary stones, the kind the forester meant when he said walking marks the memory as much as rock. You slow because slowness reads better here, and you make the whole hand greeting the stones. Deserve, then tap, once, a polite knock that says present. You are marking attendance. You circle the first stone and the lichen shows you continents, green Africa, orange archipelagos, a white drift shaped like a dog with a bell. Your breath steadies because maps even in moss help ankles and minds agree on direction. Mainstream fact arrives in the tone of bells heard at a distance, in these islands and beyond. Parishes once beat the bounds at Rogation Tide. The 3 days before Ascension, clergy and neighbors walking the edges, chanting litanies, tapping markers with willow wands. sometimes bumping a boy against a stone so his skull would remember where maps did not yet live. Some called them gang days, and the purpose was memory with prayer braided through. You walk in that ghost procession now, keeping your lantern slit nearly closed out of respect. Because proud light at a boundary feels like rudeness. The air holds a faint scent of crushed nettle and something sweeter. Perhaps someone has left a posy recently. Fringe detail raises its hand with shy authority. You have heard of folk who tuck salt, charcoal, and a coin in a boundary hole when a new stone is set. A time capsule and a charm against forgetting. Some swear the coin is to pay any spirits who audit. Others say it pays future lawyers. You look for a hole and find one on the lee side, stuffed with last year's leaf felt. You do not pry, you let customs keep their own pockets. Joke one smirks, you consider submitting an expense claim to the parish for all the cheese you have donated to public order. Then remember the parish ledger is made of bark and patience. You pass to the next marker, half sunk. Its top chiseled with a cross that has been rubbed to a gentle X by rain and fingers. You rub once too, not to change it, to join the filing system, and the soil answers with a soft echo under your boots, the kind of drum you only hear when people have walked one line for centuries. You speak aloud a litany of your own. Not saints, but things you can name on this edge: bracken, hazel stool, rook hinge, alder whisper. Your breath lengthens to the pace of a slow procession, and you feel how walking in company, even alone, persuades fear to become curiosity with manners. At the third stone a ribbon flutters, blue, a cousin to the red that keeps following your days. Someone has tied it in a careful double, not a quiet vow. You leave it, of course, and think of the ferryman's thread and the forester's cross. How small colors hold big agreements, your three bent saints, bracket, hinge. And don't be foolish, tick in your pouch like commas, reminding your sentences not to run where they should walk. Historians still debate whether beating the bounds in the Middle Ages was common and continuous, or a patchwork practice that later blossomed in early modern order-making. Some scholars read parish records and see communal self-defense against encroachment, neighbors teaching children the village's skin. Others see clerics and officials choreographing hierarchy, reminding people where prayers end and penalties begin. Both readings fit like alternating weathers. You feel both here, the soft democracy of feet and the sternness of stone. Your staff meets a fourth marker half swallowed by bramble, and you negotiate with thorns in the key of courtesy. Whole hand apology, small bow, joke 2 raises its head, and you file a formal HR complaint with the bramble regarding workplace prickliness. Complaint accepted, appeal denied. A little further on a stone lies flat, toppled, its face checkered by ants and sunlight. You kneel and trace a worn letter with a nail head, perhaps a parish initial, perhaps a mason's game, and you say the name of the parish aloud even though no one pays you to do it. Names are good bread, you eat them slowly. Mainstream truth joins the walk again. In many places the perambulation included stopping to share bread and ale, church alesh and neighborly cups. And children were sometimes lifted over hedges, turned upside down, or gently whipped with twigs at markers so memory would live in muscle and laughter, not just ears. You imagine the laughter here, easy and sore-footed, mixing with psalms and a toddler yelling at a rook. You find a fifth stone set by a shallow ditch that glints with a water's eye, and you consider stepping over. Then remember the rule about showing your hands when you step onto someone else's grass. You raise your open palm, a small embassy, and cross where the earth says yes by firmness. Somewhere on the wind you think you hear the long-ago cadence of the litany of the saints. Ora pro nobis, ora pro nobis, a rhythm more than words, and your shoulders let go of a knot you did not know you carried. Fringe custom leans in again. An old man once told you their parish through hazel catkins on a boundary stream and read their drift like omens. If they sank, tax would too. If they floated, lambing would come easy. You cannot vouch for the accuracy of catkins, but the gesture itself feels like a letter to the season, polite and brief. The sixth stone has been kissed by bees. A skep once sat near this hedge. You can tell by the smoothness of a plank set in the bank and by a faint honey memory in the shade. You touch your pouch where the ash tree's hollow once tasted of sweet, and accept the echo. Not everything useful is a sign, but some things are simply encouragement to keep walking. You pass a notch cut into an oak that serves as a side altar for offerings too humble to need a table. Bent nail, a penny dark as old rain, a scrap of ribbon, a clay bead with a clumsy cross thumbed into it. You raise your hand and nod, then move on. The ground here records feet so faithfully that your staff's tapping begins to align with hollows your eyes can't quite see until your ankles find them. Joke 3 tells you that if you tap long enough you will unlock a new parish like an old door in a puzzle. You reassure your joke that this is not a game with levels, it is a place with neighbors, one of whom might be the forester. If you trespass with enthusiasm, you keep your enthusiasm mostly on the side of reverence. The seventh stone hums slightly when your staff touches it, a trick of bone and air, and you press your ear to it because you trust artifacts that hum. You hear a small, buried space under the grass, perhaps a fox den, perhaps an old stone socket gone hollow, perhaps sound choosing a toy. You smile because chosen toys are often humble. Mainstream fact sidles back with a small ledger. Medieval parishes were legal as much as sacred, units that collected tithes, repaired roads, kept the poor list, and arbitrated hedges. Boundaries were not just lines in a hymn. They were how bread, bridges, and obligations found their way to the right door. The stones remember that better than any eloquence does. You come to a low bridge with 3 stones crouched like old men discussing whether a processional cross had once stood here. You think because the grass lifts into a little plinth shape, and on the far side someone has scraped a circle with 6 petals into dry mud, the daisy will you saw at the Grange, reappearing as if to say we keep our notes in several notebooks. You add one of yours, you lean your staff across the circle, not to deface it, to underline it softly, then lift it away. While you are crouched, a child's voice from memory brushes past. This is where they bumped my head when the lambs were small. You know it is only your own mind speaking in a borrowed register, but even borrowed registers help. You rise and breathe through the clean ache a long walk puts in knees. Then keep the procession you have built. Stone 8 cants toward an elder bush that smells of wine slowly inventing itself. Stone 9 hides under bracken arranging its sense of humor. And stone 10 stands stubborn in a ditch that forgot to be deep. You refill your water where it wiggles through pebbles. Taste iron again. Test your staff on the far bank. Wait a beat because caution likes rhythm. Then cross. The world steadies its breath with you. Historians still debate whether parish edges tracked older Roman estates, Anglo-Saxon hundreds, or the natural logic of water and ridge refined by habit. Some boundaries look like geometry, some like botany, and most like negotiations that took centuries and were never truly finished. You give the debate the respect of a nod because today you can feel this line as something sewn by hands, not printed by decree, and you suspect both are true in different places. A rook follows with its hinge voice, perhaps your unofficial verger, and you accept the companionship. You approach a place where 2 stones stand like a doorway without a lintel, and the soil inside their span is packed into an old footpath so smooth it feels lacquered. Here you stop and make a present of the quiet, not because you have learned all its edges, but because rituals appreciate being met halfway. You remove your cap to the sapling the forester asked you once to greet for the sake of future shade, then to the stones because they kept this path for the living and for those who will walk it after your story folds. Fringe detail asks for a moment and you give it. There is a tale in one valley that the priest would press boys into the hedge here and rub nettles gently on their wrists so they would never forget the boundary in their blood. Nettles do the remembering even if boys do not. You touch a nettle leaf with a gentle finger and it declines to sting you, mercy of angle and pressure more than miracle. Still, a nice courtesy. Joke 4 blurts that you would like to propose a revised ritual involving a feather and jam tarts. The stones do not vote, you pass on. The path now runs close to a meadow, where grass makes its own arguments in low wind, and a dragonfly scribbles a signature you can't read but trust anyway. You feel the procession curling back toward the very track you left this morning. Not because you are lost. Because borders are circles that prefer to close, you finish the round at the first stone, the one with continents, and you find, stuck to its damp side, a single hair of horse. Caught like a tally mark, you leave it and you leave, which is the main art of visiting. You check your pocket inventory, red thread memory, ferryman's notch, forester's cross, 3 bent saints, a last philosophical cheese corner in case a hound applies for a grant, and you shoulder the pack with the small ceremony you reserve for moving on with your edges tucked. You take 3 steps, stop, return, and tap the first stone again. Lightly, a soft bracket to close your silent psalm. Then you walk, not faster, better, the way you walk after the world, and you exchange signatures on a contract neither of you had to sign to keep. The trees let a little extra light through as if copying your courtesy, and the path ahead does the generous thing paths do when they approve of your pace. It widens just enough to feel like agreement without becoming a road that invites trouble. With livery and mismatched colors. That will be tomorrow's conversation. Today belongs to stones that whisper, to feet that listen, and to a guest who keeps promises by putting one step in front of another at the speed of prayer. The path widens into the suggestion of a cart road and then pinches as if the forest has reconsidered its generosity. And in that pinch the colors appear before the men do. Triangles of cloth pinned to jerkins, scraps of dye that never quite agree with each other, red too bright for blood, blue too tired for a saint, yellow that might once have been wheat if wheat were woven from rumor. 3 figures lean across the ruts the way oxen lean into a yoke, and a 4th sits on a stump cleaning a blade so short it works harder at psychology than at cutting. You slow to the forester's pace of courtesy, whole hand open. No pointing because pointing pricks, and your lantern slit stays narrow because proud light at a negotiation looks like a dare, their hound, a rough dog with an ear torn into a small heraldic flag, steps forward and writes your story with his nose. You endure the edit, produce a corner of cheese as if you were paying a filing fee, and the dog accepts with the solemnity you have come to admire in bureaucrats with wet noses. Joke 1 clears its throat. You consider asking whether the group prefers to be addressed as livery or as bandits. Decide that labeling is for archivists and proceed with the neutral honorific of men. The tallest says toll in a voice that makes the word 2 syllables, and the others let the echo do half the work. You take in the scraps of color again, not uniform enough to declare a lord's badge, but insistent enough to pretend. Mainstream fact lines up soberly beside your pulse. Late medieval retinues wore livery, colors and badges, to mark a lord's affinity, and kings worried about livery and maintenance. The private armies and influence of great men, statutes under Edward IV and later Henry VII tried to curb the practice, but cloth is persuasive and so are dinners. Many roads learned to read colors with mixed feelings. You say none of that aloud. You say good morning in a tone that aspires to be weather. The tall one taps his boot on the cart rut as if he were collecting bridge money. Says pontage, the royal word for toll to mend a bridge, and you ask which bridge, as if you might send a letter of thanks. He names one far downstream, which is ambitious of him. You nod gravely, because gravity is the gentlest form of resistance, and ask if his pontage carries a writ with a wax seal that knows its job. He smiles lemon peel like the reeve and suggests that his friend's knife is the seal you can see. You consider your pockets, red thread memory, ferryman's notch on a willow tally, the forester's cross, 3 bent saints, bracket, hinge, and don't be foolish, and one last philosophical cheese corner. You do not reach for coin because coin would bleed you faster. You reach for stories because stories clot. The causeway ahead is sulking under peat. You say softly, the forester taught me to test with a staff before pride, and if you are gathering for bridge work you will not want your boots swallowed before lunch. The knife man pauses, the dog burps honesty, and the tall one asks which forester. You describe him by his hound's cheese preferences and by the arithmetic he keeps in mast and fines. The dog sniffs your sleeve in corroboration, modestly proud. The men take in your tally stick, The neat notch the ferryman cut, the red thread like a small oath. The forester's cross added after, and you watch comprehension paint the air. Someone with standing has already written on you, lightly but legibly. Historians still debate whether the roads were thick with outlaws, routiers, and robbers' leagues, or whether chroniclers loved toothy stories more than numbers. Some scholars read court rolls and see flare-ups tied to war and harvest failure, the free companies after treaties, disbanded men with swords and no bread. Others argue that violence on roads was more occasional than legend makes it, and that most travelers feared fees and weather more than daggers. You live the debate as breath. This morning, persuasion with props and a dog's trust. The tall man lowers his voice the way a person does when he wants his threat to sound like a favor. He says you can pay in coin, in news, or in time, and of the three, the last is worst because time unwraps you to bone. You choose news because you have some that does not betray anyone. You tell of pilgrims with shells like pocket moons, of a ford that yesterday was a rumor and then a shallow that clattered politely underfoot, of a yew-walled grange where owls kept accounts and barley remembered summers, and of a white stag that bowed like an usher and walked away before anyone could dress him in meaning. The men listen because men live on stories even when they pretend to bill only in silver. Joke 2 asks if you should itemize. You add line items anyway. Wolves sounded as inventory in the night, but the pads kept to a parallel ledger, and the forester said to show your hands if you cross a neighbor's grass, which you do now. Open palm, a small embassy. The knife man sheathes his psychology and asks whether the ferryman is taking normal fees or stories like everyone else. You answer that he took iron shavings yesterday and tied a red thread to his notch to keep river spirits from editing his handwriting. Fringe detail lands like a small bright bird. The shortest of the men touches the thread on your tally with one finger and makes a face like someone who dislikes copy editors made of water. He holds up his own wrist, knotted with blue yarn, says his granny believes blue confuses pickpockets because it matches the sky and makes fingers forget they are thieves. You file that beside rowan twigs twisted into purse strings and stones in apron pockets to keep witches from lifting girls with wind, none of which you plan to test. The tall one asks if you are running pigs this season or if you are a pilgrim without paperwork. You say you are a debtor with a dare and a receipt in progress, and you put the strip of town charter on the table, which is to say your palm, the wax seal long since torn and nailed to the ferry. Post like a hedgehog of permissions. You name the reeve with the lemon peel smile and watch the men's faces change, the way faces do when a town gets mentioned, because bandit and neighbor are sometimes the same man an hour apart. The knife man taps your tally and says we could scratch our own mark, make it a safer walk, call it escort, and his smile says fee again, but the dog, who has seized control of this meeting's minutes, sits square in front of you and leans a head against your knee with the confidence of an auditor who has smelled no lies and would like more cheese. You offer the treaty corner. It is accepted, and with it the motion that no mark be added. Consensus by dairy, mainstream detail joins to keep the moment honest. Travelers in many parts bought lead tokens and pewter badges at shrines, cheap saints worn on hats. Used sometimes as small change, sometimes as proof to open a hospice door, sometimes as armor in the imagination. You have none to trade, only your notch and thread and a voice that does not scramble under questioning. The tall man scratches his jaw and tests another tactic that is 90% kindness and 10% trap. News for news, he says. The ride east has livery that matches better than ours, and a horn was heard at dawn where the path meets the Lord's Chase. If you plan to walk that way, walk with your staff ready to vote. His knife friend adds that a drowned causeway sleeps 2 valleys over and wakes hungry for carts. A fair warning that also sounds like a story made to herd you into their preferred direction. You thank them and mention, because the forester asked you to spread scents like seeds, that boundary stones remember better if feet beat them each spring. Your turn. You say, and tell them the charcoalers dislike whistling because wind is kin to fire and comes when invited. They grin at the taboo and one demonstrates his non-whistling by not whistling very loudly. Joke 3 tries to help. You announce that fines ruin winters faster than wolves and that a swineherd bells pigs to sort gossip. By sound, the short one laughs, says he once stole a pig for an hour just to hear the bell and brought it back because stealing rings like a fool idea when it rings in your hand. You admire the honesty or the comedy or both. The tall man finds you one more story for the road and you pay out the hanging snare you met in Bracken. You describe the loop. The peg, the sapling that learned to sing, how you reset it lazier so a human might brush awake instead of fly. Their faces do that thing hard men's faces do when craft speaks to craft. They nod because knowledge is coin that does not offend dignity. The knife man shifts to practical matters. Asks where you sleep and whether your lantern sulks or brags. You say you keep the slit like a rumor and your feet like soft punctuation. And he approves of your grammar as if he were the charcoaler's cousin. The dog sneezes truth onto your boots again. Sealing this as a meeting rather than an account, the tall one steps aside the width of a man who could change his mind and has not, allows the words pass then in the democratic tone of ditches that have carried rain far longer than men carry grudges. You pass as if the word were a hinge and your three little saints clicked it for you. One of the mismatched colors calls after you that a green man is carved on a lintel eastward with a smile that bites, and that you should nod to him because some faces keep tally. Historians still debate whether the smile of such foliate faces warned, welcomed, or winked. You agree over your shoulder that faces deserve nods and close your mouth because winning the last sentence is not winning. It is extra walking. You keep your staff low but ready like a courtesy you can defend. And the path tightens under beech shade as if to check your resolve. Behind you the men take up their argument with the day, which is to say with bread, and you choose not to listen. In front of you the road becomes a line that sometimes remembers it is also a seam. Between parishes you tap the first stone you see, not a boundary this time, only a stone that enjoys being consulted, and you promise yourself to keep paying in stories where coin would bruise. Fringe detail brushes your sleeve as if to sign off on the method. An old woman once swore that to travel safely you should tuck a scrap of bread and salt in your purse to remind your stomach it has allies. You have bread in your actual stomach and salt in your sweat, which will have to do. The dog's cheese diplomacy leaves a warm patch on your leg and a small smell that reads as trust. And your pocket tally weighs the same as before but feels more persuasive, the ferryman's red thread. The forester's cross, your walking signature added in the form of still being here, alive and unrobbed, which is a good mark for any morning. You lengthen your breath to the procession pace that kept you true around the stones and let the mismatched colors dissolve into understory. And if you wonder for a second whether they were bandits rehearsing livery or livery rehearsing bandity, you let the question join the day's other debates. Useful but not sovereign, you prefer the sovereigns you can actually pay, water, bread, and the soft demand of a path that wants you to proceed at the speed of sense. You walk with the aftertaste of mismatched colors in your mind and the dog's polite cheese audit still warm on your trouser. And the day thins into a pale broth where birch trunks do their best. Impression of honest fence posts, then the path kinks. The soil lifts into the familiar knuckle of an old root, and an ash leans over the ruts as if deciding your grade, its bark scrolled like a good sermon, its feet furred with moss that has not decided which compass it prefers. You pay the tree the greeting you learned from the forester, hat off, whole hand open, and let your pace slow until the world's breath and yours share a rhythm. The hollow near the base tastes of old honey again, as it did the night you tested courage there, and just beyond, where the roots clasp a pocket of dark like a cupped palm, you see it, a small bundle tucked as carefully as a sleeping mouse, hair bound with red wool, 2 bent nails hugging it like punctuation, and a sprig of thyme crisp to the color of memory. You do not touch, because touching would feel like editing someone else's sentence. You crouch instead and listen. Joke 1 taps its pencil. If this is a curse you would like to opt out of the mailing list. But the hush here has the temper of protection, not malice, the way a door says kindly not now rather. Then get out. The wool's red is cousin to the ferryman's thread, and to the blue ribbon that flirted with a boundary stone. And the nails lean inward as if conferring with your 3 in the pouch. Saint Bracket, Saint Hinge and Saint Don't Be Foolish, mutual recognition across denominations of iron. Mainstream fact steps forward with its steady lamp. Time was a respectable citizen of medieval physic. Gardens, grown by monks and layfolk for coughs, worms, and cold airs. Hildegard of Bingen praised its warming cheer. Herbals listed it for digestion and for courage in the chest. And kitchens loved it too, so finding a sprig here reads like someone who wanted the air to taste braver. As for hair and bent nails, people stitched lives to iron and body traces in more private grammars than charters record. You recall the daisy wheels scratched into stone and mud. Those drawn charms to tangle ill luck in geometry. This is the pocket version. A travel-sized hedge. Historians still debate where to draw the line between religion and magic in such daily protections, whether parish folk saw these as rival to prayer or as its homespun cousin. Some scholars argue for popular religion braided with sanctioned rites. Others say the church frowned and tolerated by forgetting to look down. The record is a patchwork of sermons. Fines and shrugs. You let the debate breathe in the ash shade without choosing sides because the bundle looks like love in materials that could be found at arm's reach. Fringe lore saunters in. Later centuries will pickle fear in which bottles. Stoneware jugs buried under hearths with urine. Pins, hair. The hurt turned around to bite itself. Shoes and cats hidden in walls to startle mischief into quitting. Not your century's fashion perhaps, but the rhyme is close. Nails and hair and a plant that smells like memory. You glance around to see who the audience might be. Trees, ants, 2 patient beetles, and possibly a green man carved into a lintel somewhere. East counting from a distance. The ash itself hums in that way ashwood does. The famous spear straight temper of it. Kings and carpenters love this tree. Spear and rake and will rim drawn from the same clean grain. You think of your staff, of the ferryman's willow tally, of the forester's stick, all the woods in your story taking different offices. Joke 2 announces that if the bundle sprouts legs and walks, off you will promote it to supervisor of coincidences and give it Thursdays. The air does not offer legs, just the sound of a nearby runnel rehearsing for a larger stream. You lower the lantern slit to a hair, then close it entirely to keep the charcoaler's rule. No proud flame near sleep, because this thing is asleep on purpose. You take inventory of possible meanings and stop before you begin to steal. Leave it be is the clearest sentence here that does not require translation. Yet you can give it witness, and witness counts. You say aloud the least meddlesome blessing you own. May your job be the one your maker assigned you. You say it softly because even kindness can startle. Mainstream detail threads itself through again. Pilgrim badges were not only souvenirs. People sewed pewter saints to hats and sleeves as traveling armor. Crosses, scallops, and little Becket busts made a theology of tin. And lead tokens sometimes passed for coin or contract, proof that metal, worn close, carried a vocabulary of care. This hedge under ash is the same desire, only with house-covered materials. A pocket sacrament in red and iron and herb. You consider whether the bent nails in your pouch want to lie down with their cousins under the root and decide that giving away your commas would bankrupt your sentences. You settle for a gentler exchange. You slide 1 nail free, press it to the bark above the bundle, then return it to your pocket. A touch, not an attachment, a neighborly knock. The ash keeps its counsel and a wren scolds as if to sign the record. Historians still debate whether ash was singled out as especially protective. Rowan gets the most footnotes with its red berries and witch-stopping repute. But ash too shows up in door lintels and cradles, in hedges that keep fields honest, and in spear lore that says a straight shaft remembers truth. You remember the spears that did not appear when livery and banditry merely asked for news, and you prefer today's philosophy. Spears that stay in trees, nails that bend to catch small badnesses like burrs. Time that announces its courage. Without theater, you lean back on your heels and think of other threshold tricks you have met. The corn dolly ghost in the grange, the owl doorway keeping barley company, the hex foils in mud and stone repeating the 6-petaled melody of caution. The fairy post prickled with token papers like a hedgehog of permissions. And you realize the forest keeps a museum of household theology in pieces small enough to pocket, joke 3 lobbies to check whether the hair matches your color and therefore obligates you to file some paperwork. You decline both the checking and the paperwork. Barbering is not in your remit, nor is diagnosis. What is in your remit is to pass without scuffing the careful. You untie your canteen, pour a sip for the ground as thanks for letting you see the private exhibit, and drink the rest to teach your thirst the word later. A rook creaks by on a hinge that is both old and comforting, and the ash throws a small shade that fits your shoulders perfectly for 3 breaths, which you accept. You take the tally from the ferryman out, the red thread faded by moving, the notch clear, the forester's cross at the end, a little history of your yes to the reeve. And you lay it, not touching, near the bundle, letting red see red, iron see iron, words see herbs. Then you put it away. Your pockets feel heavier afterward, which is the trick of meaning rather than mass in a village. You think, this would perhaps sit under a cradle or a doorstep, hair to link the person, nails bent to tangle sharpness back on itself, time to make the air remember bravery and supper, a hedge against nightmares and neighborly spite. Children would be taught to step around it without commentary, and the cat would ignore it with professional skill. The cat is not present, but the ash is, and so are you. And being present is what most bundles ask of witnesses. Historians still debate whether we should read these signs as fear or competence, a culture of worry or a culture of tools. You vote for tools today because the white stag bowed and you did not chase him into a bog, and the livery men let you pay in stories, and the boundary stones answered you with attendance. The world has offered you several methods for not making things worse, and this is one more. You rise with the care you use getting up in a church while someone else is still praying, and for 3 steps you keep your eyes on the ground so the bundle can be alone again. Then, when you do look up, the path has done that generous thing it does once you have minded your behavior. It reveals a clearer track angled around a wet thought. The causeway that sulks is well to your right. You thank the forester for lessons and the ferryman for copy editing and the charcoaler for the vent. Grammar, you check your pouch, 3 bent saints accounted for, cheese reduced to faith-based optimism, tally tucked, and you take the ash with you the way a person tucks a note under their tongue. Present but quiet, fringe custom puts a final pin in the page. You remember an elder who swore that brushing a child's brow with time at candlelighting could keep fevers meek and dreams accurate. You will not test it. No child here but yourself, and you are busy pretending to be a sturdy grown traveler. But the idea leans kindly on your shoulder as you go. You promise the bundle aloud that you will tell no one exactly where the ash leans or how the roots hold their pocket. You will say only that you saw proof that people have always laced fear and love into small knots and tucked them where wood can. Watch, the ash accepts your confidentiality without countersigning. You walk on at the speed of sense, soft-footed, no pointing, no counting aloud, letting time ghost your breath and bent nails keep time in your pocket. 1 foot. Then the next, leaving behind a bundle that is not yours and carrying forward the discipline of not needing it to be. Evening raises its eyebrows and the hills beyond the tree-lean answer with sparks, first 1, then 3, then a seam of small suns pricked into the dusk as if someone sewed the sky from below. And you know the season by the color of the light, midsummer fires, St. John's Eve most likely. The week when people leap smoke as if fear were a hurdle and bread a prize. You pause with the forester's grammar in your bones. No stamping, no pointing, whole hand greetings to whatever notices. And you let your lantern slit thin to a courtesy because proud flame is a contradiction near feast fire. Wind ferries a thread of laughter and the far clatter of a pail. And the beech leaves shiver like a congregation about to sing. Mainstream fact steps forward and sets its stool. All across medieval Europe folk lit St. John's bonfires near the solstice. Drove cattle through smoke to bless hides and hooves. Tossed herbs into embers for vigor. Leaped flames for luck and fertility. And kept embers to smuggle the day's confidence into tomorrow's. Hearth parish clergy often watched. Sometimes led, sometimes frowned, but always counted. The forest listens with you and answers with its own sparks. Not fire, eyes, low and amber at brush height. The kind of punctuation that reads as curiosity if you keep your verbs slow. Wolves filed themselves as inventory 2 nights ago, and now the ledger shows fox and deer and an ambitious hedgehog. You smile in your breath, joke 1 arrives politely. If you leap anything tonight, it will be a puddle with realistic expectations, not a bonfire with opinions. The distant ridge brightens as a new crown of sparks rises. Single points becoming a belt of flame, and the wind brings the medical scent of St. John's wort bruised in fist and pocket. You remember the charcoaler's cap with its tuft of wort. How he said smoke behaves when told the sun remembers it. You also remember the hanging snare and decide no running leaps are owed to anyone's tradition. Your staff translates path into sense, and you angle toward a gap where the tree's thin and the hill. Fires show their shoulders between trunks like giants rehearsing manners. Fringe detail lifts a hand as if asking permission to share a secret it will tell 1,000 times. People whisper that fern seed ripens at midnight on street. John's Eve, invisible as a thought, and whoever traps it in a pewter plate or a folded letter becomes unseen and lucky. You have no pewter, and your luck lately has been of the noisy, easily audited kind. Besides, ferns caught you kindly once, and you won't repay structural mercy by pickpocketing myths. Historians still debate whether these solstice customs are old pagan bones, baptized by new calendars or medieval inventions wearing antique perfume. Some scholars argue for continuity from pre-Christian rites of sun and field. Others point to parish records and sermons that suggest a lively, recent creativity under church umbrellas. The record is a mosaic, as usual, and you accept not knowing while your ears sort the music of distance. Shouts. A drum made of barrel and stick. A thin pipe that sounds like a green twig whistling. To itself, nearer, the forest's own percussion. Deer stepping away with soft disrespect. A rook hinge creaking approval from a self-assigned perch. The ground smooths into a ledge of turf, and you take the height just enough to see over birch scrim. There, on a bald shoulder of hill, villagers circle flame. Small figures leaping 2 at a time as sparks fly up like arguments that refuse to be unpersuasive. Someone rolls a rhymed will wreathed in straw down a slope, and people gasp when it keeps its balance. Mainstream history nods at your shoulder again with a textbook under its arm. In parts of Germany, France, and England, people bound straw wheels, set them alight, and sent them down hills to read the year. If the wheel burned bright and clean, harvest would follow. If it stumbled, fields might sulk. The custom drew smiles and scolds in equal measure. You watch a single spark drift toward the forest's lip and die with the good manners of a guest who knows when to say goodnight. Behind you, eyes blink and cease to be threats by failing to move closer. The forest is holding a mirror to the feast and choosing to keep its reflections polite. You sit on a root and eat the last non-philosophical corner of cheese, saving a whiff for bureaucrats with wet noses, and sip water like a penitent who discovered the right cue by accident. The ferryman's notch weighs lightly in your palm when you check it. The red thread a dark line in the half-light, and the forester's cross scratches an affectionate tick at the end. A little sentence of authority you can read in your pocket. The bonfires shed voices that arrive ruined by wind and still recognizable as belonging to people who are safer than usual because they decided to be. You think of the boundary stones and the child, lifted laughing against nettles, of the owl doorway and barley's careful breath, of the ash root bundle bent around hair and time, and it occurs to you that tonight the whole district has made one bigger charm. Smoke, song, leaps, a circle of human attention drawn tight like a red thread around fear. Joke 2 wants to practice athletic humility. You negotiate with your knees and agree that you could leap. A fire if it were the size of a candle and the candle were already out. The forest hears and grants you mercy by refusing to produce a candle. A moth bumps your wrist with the insistence of an idea trying to be remembered and drifts toward your lantern. You shut the slit completely to keep from writing a crime against the charcoaler's taboos. No proud light near sleeping woods. And because moths are poor navigators in a world that keeps making suns, you stand and walk the seam where feast sound tucks into leaf sound. Close enough to hear the drum consult with feet. Far enough to let your own silence keep its shape. A fox crosses the path carrying a something that wants to be called a sandwich but looks more like a chicken's opinion. You bow because predation is law with whiskers, and because the fox will not accept your commentary. Mainstream fact adds another bead to your memory string. The church calendar set straight. John's birthday at midsummer and Christ's at midwinter. A symmetry of light rising and light returning. Vespers bells and bonfire bells sharing air for a week that allowed both scythe and psalm to feel official. Parish priests sometimes blessed the flames. Sometimes they preached against wool rolling and fern tails. Most did both in the same week. The debate belongs to them. The walking belongs to you. As you move, you notice little domestic echoes under the canopy. Hear a tiny pile of stones blackened by cook fire long dead. They're a circle of flattened grass where youths with foolishly fast hearts sat telling truths they will later call jokes. And farther on, a sapling bent into an arch, tied with straw and 3 blue threads. A private threshold erected by someone who wanted to walk under a season and become gentler on the far side. You pass beneath with your whole hand open and your head not high, because thresholds see better than you do. Fringe custom nudges you with a grin you recognize from alehouse corners. Some swear that if you place 9 kinds of wood on a St. John's fire and run around it 9 times sunwise, you will never be surprised by weather or taxmen for a year. Your knees file a dissenting opinion on the running, and your ledger files one on tax. You content yourself with walking once around the nearest beach sunwise, which is to say clockwise, which is also to say with polite intentions, and you leave a bent nail at the base. Briefly, to learn the bark's temperature like a doctor's palm, then return it to its post. St. Hinge tapped, present and accounted for. Joke 3 presents its agenda item. If fern seed grants invisibility, perhaps you already gathered some by accident, and that is why no one has robbed you lately. You decline magical self-congratulation and credit, instead your habit of paying in stories where coin would bruise. A horn speaks from the east, not the Lord's chase. This has the friendlier throat of a cow caller, and in a moment a scatter of shadowy cattle begin their patient commute through distant smoke, so that hides will be less interesting to flies, and eyes, your own eyes, blink wet from the thought of it. Care imposed with the softest possible pressure, smoke as lotion, and you wonder again at how many kinds of protection have been invented that do not look like armor. You reach a low ridge where bracken pretends to be ocean and watch sparks jump with more discipline than bracken ever displayed. One lands near your boot and dies. Polite to the last, you grind it anyway because courtesy can share space with duty. And you murmur thanks to the absent charcoaler whose rules keep all your nights the right temperature. The bonfires on the far slope dip and flare as dancers thin from ardor to wobble. And singing slides toward talk. The feast answers the forest one last time. A big leap, 2 smaller ones. An old woman laughing like dry kindling catching proper. And the forest answers back with a final wink of eyes. Then shuts them. The ledger of night closes with a thunk you can almost hear. You test the path ahead with your staff, recalling the forester's warning about sulking causeways and the bandits' news about horns near the chase, and choose the route that smells least like peat opinion and most like honest dust. Your pockets inventory themselves with the small vanity of tools polished by use. Red thread notch, cross, 3 bent saints, empty cheese treaty, 1 nail's warmth, starched by bark. Your breath returns to the procession rhythm that carried you around stones, and you find that your shoulders have learned another habit. They slope easier when villages light hills, even if you never step into the circle. Shared warmth sees further than lanterns do. Historians still debate whether church and crown tamed these customs by permitting them, or whether such permission simply recognized a stubborn truth. People will build their own ropes against the dark, call them feasts, tie them with songs, and hold them even while men with seals hold other ropes. You vote with your feet and keep to the seam where songs thin into leaf noise, where personal talismans become community policy for one patient evening and then fold back into pockets as smoke. The path flattens into a sentence that forgets its verbs, and you smell the change before you see it. Iron breath turning brown and old. A wet library of tannin where the ground keeps long grudges. Reed whispers on both sides, and ahead the world goes glossy. Not a lake, not a stream. Something in between, holding its breath over what used to be road. The drowned causeway, the forester warned you about, sulking under peat with the dignity of a retired official. You close the lantern slit to a courtesy line because proud light near sleep is still rudeness, and you lift your staff like a question. Mark the ground is obliged to answer. Joke one clears its throat. You promise to file a customer service ticket with the bog if it attempts to keep your boots as a souvenir. The staff finds firmness in patches. Old brushwood knitted under silt like corduroy. Then treachery, the color of tea. You test twice. Step once. A new grammar that does not pay overtime for haste. Mainstream fact steadies your breath. Across fens and wetlands, people built causeways of fascines and timbers. Brushwood mats pinned with stakes and sometimes overlaid with planks. A ribcage for mud. Romans improved some, monks maintained others. And before both there were trackways like the sweet track laid in the Neolithic, timber paths that rode bog the way a ship rides swell. But timber forgets and peat remembers. You touch the ferryman's notch in your pocket so red thread can whisper to water that you once paid a toll. The reeds answer with that careful applause they reserve for people who have decided to take responsibility for their ankles. A pale light stirs ahead and to your right, small, uncertain. A candle the size of a lie, then another a little farther on. Will-o'-the-Wisp's handwriting. The marsh making a joke with gas and imagination. Fringe lore leans in with mud on its boots. Some swear you should turn your cloak inside out to unconfuse a wisp, or carry bread and salt so the ground remembers you are a guest at supper, not a rumor to be swallowed. You have already turned your cloak on a wolf night, and you carry bread in the only place that matters, your stomach, so you decline theatricality and keep to the staff's grammar. Historians still debate whether ancient timber causeways into wetlands served practical trade or ritual processions, whether people crossed to cut peat and visit neighbors or to speak with gods who prefer wet thresholds. Flag fawn and the sweet track have been read both ways. Votive offerings arguing one thesis, will ruts, and where arguing another, you accept the luxury of uncertainty while your toes interview each foot length of earth. The track shows itself in shy notches, a row of pegged stakes felt with your staff before seen, and you follow that dotted line as if reading a monk's marginalia. Whole hand greeting the air whenever balance asks. The bracken remembers last night's rumor about fern seed and invisibility, and you answer it with joke too. If you suddenly vanish, it will be from prudence, not magic. And someone should tell the reeve that a debt disappeared because the causeway filed an uncharitable claim. The world keeps a straight face and offers you a hummock the size of a pew. Politely placed, you step onto it and let your calves write a letter to your heart about patience. To your left, a black mirror opens under a veil of green thread. Duckweed smiling like a hostess with an agenda. You do not RSVP. You recall the mismatched colors who styled themselves toll keepers and the knife that worked harder at psychology than cutting. And you hear the tall one's voice saying the drowned causeway wakes hungry for carts. True enough, but you have no cart and you have learned the rules, no stamping. No counting aloud, whole hand gestures to what notices. You hum the shepherd's kyrie under your breath to keep your steps in mercy. And the earth appreciates the tune even if it does not applaud. Mainstream detail snaps in like a plumb line. Peat cuts preserve things with a tannic patience that turns ox yokes, shoes, and even unlucky bodies into time travelers. A reminder that this softness bites when asked and cradles when unprovoked, which is to say you keep your provocation budget at zero. A dragonfly saws the air with glassy certainty and writes an O across a patch that looks tempting. You redirect and decide the insect just earned tenure on your faculty of advisors. Your staff knocks a submerged rail and the sound tastes like bog oak. That deep, tar black with the ferryman's hat could have been carved from if hats were made of centuries. You kneel, glove your hand in your sleeve, and feel old timber still convinced of its job. A rib of the road, you explore with fingers the peg to the left, the tie to the right, and measure steps over the submerged spine like a penitent who trusts the architect. Joke 3 visits to remind you that the forest refuses to publish weight limits and you are obliged to proofread your mass with every breath. The reeds around you practice gossip. Blade to blade, sharing news about cattle driven through last night's street. John smoke, and your chest loosens at the thought of hides touched by flame to confuse flies and bad luck. Protection that smells of herbs and community rather than iron. It cheers the pocket where your 3 bent saints ride, bracket, hinge, and don't be foolish, and they tick softly like regimented commas as you step. The wisp light repeats its trick. Now to your left, now to your right, as if auditioning for a job you never posted. Fringe explanation gives the sober counter-sermon, marsh gas, phosphine, methane, finding flame in air, a chemistry that likes to cosplay as folklore, and both can be true in a night that enjoys. Theater, you keep to your rehearsal of quiet verbs. Find a run of brushwood that answers your staff with a half laugh of resilience, and traverse it the way you learned to cross rumor yesterday at the ford. With ankles that listen and knees that apologize, a curlew releases a note like a question asked by water and you answer by not hurrying. The air cools further and that iron taste walks back onto your tongue, polite, then insistent. The track swings gently right to avoid a place where brown bubbles blink and pop like eyes. You do not stare back, you practice the charcoaler's taboo and do not whistle. Wind is kin to fire and cousins come when called. You save your breath for naming things the way you named boundary stones, stake, plank, tuft, safe, and this litany braids your feet to the subtle line the builders wanted you to keep. Mainstream truth adds another solid bead to your string. Medieval statutes allowed pontage, temporary tolls, to fund bridge repair. Here the bridge is horizontal and soggy, but you pay attention as tax and it purchases your passage. You pause at a cross tie that thunks under your staff like a heart, kneel, and lay your palm to the damp. Through skin you register the road's argument with the bog, not violent, steady, a marriage counseling session that has lasted centuries. You think of the owl doorway in the grange and the way swallows sewed rafters out of flight for an hour, and you feel how making paths is liturgy as much as logistics. Another pale light rises at the corner of your eye and you turn your head slowly so that imagination does not seize the tiller. There, not gas now, a stub of candle sheltered in a clay dish tucked into a niche of peat hum. You do not touch, but your breath changes respectfully for a stranger's small shrine. Perhaps to a child lost here once, or to a saint who knows wet places, or to a husband who cut peat and did not come home on a fog day. You respect the jurisdiction of grief and move on with your lantern slit still narrower than apology. Historians still debate whether these little shrines in marsh edges belong to parish priests or to private hands. Some read them as extensions of rogation prayers. Others as household theology patched into geography. Your answer is the same as it was at the Ashroot bundle, witness without editing. You inch forward and the brushwood changes its tone from tight to springy. Fresh repairs perhaps. Someone has been here this year, and you bless them under your breath because anonymous competence is your favorite neighbor. The path rises almost nothing and yet your calves cheer as if a hill had been conquered. The reeds thin and let alder in. The ground's color changes from tea to bread crust, and your staff starts to sound again like someone finishing a sentence rather than someone beginning a negotiation. Joke 4 shows up late and sheepish. You inform the bog that you will leave a modest review. Great ambience, would not recommend for dancing, and the bog declines to clap. The last stretch pretends to be easy and therefore earns double testing. You pay tap, step, and only when the peat memory becomes soil memory do you let your shoulders ask permission to drop. You pause and look back, not to taunt a difficulty but to honor The causeway shows as a faint seam of reed shelter and brown thought. A handwriting you will not soon forget. Your pockets inventory themselves with the vanity of survivors. Red thread notch, Forester's cross. 3 bent saints practicing metronome, empty cheese treaty, and the soft weight of not having sunk, mainstream fact slides in for one last line. In the Fenlands people wore pattens or mud shoes in. Some seasons, little platforms to spread weight, and carried long poles that tested and rescued both. You had only one staff in your stubbornness, and both did their jobs. You take 3 slow breaths so your heart does not feel tricked. Then move on 1 foot, then the next, the way you have moved since the Roman stones gave up their spine, and behind you the drowned causeway resumes its privacy. Insulted by no flame, robbed of no story, yet having given you just enough sentence to cross from rumor to road. The ground hardens from tea brown to bread crust, and then the first horn smears a silver line through the beaches, 3 notes, then 2, then a roll like a barrel thinking about hills, and the understory wakes into organized intention. Voices spaced the way hedges space fields. Beaters pushing air with sticks. Dogs writing footnotes in scent, and a ribbon of livery that actually matches for once, green and white like someone made a treaty with birch. You remember the warning the mismatched colors tossed. After you, horns near the chase. And here they are, tightening the day as if it were a belt. You do the Forester's grammar, no stamping, no pointing, whole hand greeting, and step off the track so your knees do not audition for venison. Joke 1 taps its hat. You consider announcing that you are a pedestrian with no antlers and a robust dislike of becoming an anecdote, but you settle for visible palms and a lantern slit. As thin as a whisper, because proud light near a proud hunt is the very definition of asking for it. A huntsman rides the edge of the bracken, cap feather making opinions, horn tucked against his hip like a second lung, and the hound's fountain around his horse's knees with that confidence dogs reserve for days they were bred for. You recognize a white-ticked head. Not the Forester's cheese-loving auditor, but a cousin who believes in payroll. Your hand goes to the treaty corner out of reflex and then stops because today's bureaucracy has a different clerk. Mainstream fact steadies your breath. Noble hunting in late medieval Europe was a curriculum. Par force chases for stag. Bow and boar spear for the tusked philosophers. Relay stations, horn calls coded so precisely that a mounted man could conduct dogs and beaters like a choir. Gaston Phoebus wrote the manual in his Livre de Chasse in the 14th century, complete with seasons, virtues of hounds, and instructions for reading fumets, yes, droppings like a morning newspaper. The horn shivers a new sentence higher, and the beater's clatter presses inward. A moving hedge, you do not want to be hedged, you show your tally, ferryman's notch with the red thread, Forester's cross at the end, and the rider glances down. Nods as if last year he lent those marks his pencil, then says softly, still as a pond but move out of the swath. The swath turns out to be you step wider and the swath follows because swaths love company. The hunt is not after you, not exactly, but the geometry wants you in the triangle that corners a creature who is not in the mood for triangulation. You decline gently, whole hand still speaking, and point your staff not like a spear but like a sentence that ends over there. The rider reads you and lets you be punctuation instead of quarry. He kisses to his hounds, the kind of sound that turns air into grammar, and the pack sluices past your shins as if you were a respectable gate. Joke 2, you whisper that you prefer to be a respectable wall, but the forest votes gate for today. The boar, when it arrives, does not announce itself with music. It writes a single black line through the bracken and opens the earth as if it were a curtain with mud for velvet. You see why the forester called pigs philosophers. The head reads as thought more than animal, low and considering, and the close hair on the back chops the light into salt. You do not run because running is a verb with too many conjugations in this scene. You do not stand like a pillar because pillars rarely come with legs. You drift the speed of prayer toward alder, and the boar chooses a different clause. The dogs flood that clause immediately, and the rider's horn breaks into little flags of sound to keep the commas in order. Mainstream truth keeps you honest. Boar hunts were ranked dangerous even for men who held land in their signatures. The boar spear had a crossbar to stop the animal riding up the shaft into the man, and even then the story could end in a hurry. Afterward came the curie, the ritual feeding of hounds with offal. A thank-you supper with choreography. Tapestries later made theater from these facts so winter rooms could pretend to be summer fields. Today the theater has mud and breath. The beaters shout sunwise and a second rider, a man with liveried sleeves sewn right side up for once, leans from his saddle with a spear meant to be a sentence that ends in certainty. Only the bog arithmetic you just learned at the drowned causeway has other lessons to teach. His horse tests, sinks, protests, and the beater line staggers as if a period just turned into a dash. The hunt turns inside out in an instant. The boar wheels and the dogs forget their prepositions. Suddenly you are not an observer but a margin note that might rescue the paragraph. Your staff knows exactly where the brushwood ribs sleep under the tea-colored skin. And your feet remember the dotted pegs. You swing your whole hand to the rider and call, "There, cross there." The timbers run like rails, and he looks at a stranger's face and chooses to believe it. He tows his horse sideways to your invisible ship lane, and the animal finds the old rib with the soft grunt of relief you recognize from your own calves. The spearman recovers his sentence while the boar, unamused by editorial work, opts for the alder that refuses to carry hounds politely. You do not cheer because charcoal or grammar forbids proud sound near sleep, but your ribs applaud in a private key. Fringe lore rolls in with wet boots and a grin. Someone once told you hunters warm fresh fumettes in a palm to measure how recently the author passed, a detail you file under occupational intimacy and do not emulate. A beater boy passes you carrying a wreath of oak leaves, he braided waiting for his turn. Charm or boredom management, you cannot tell, and he asks if you have seen a white hart lately because his sister swears last year's St. Hubert badge made one blink from the treeline. You nod without conferring omen and tell him you saw courtesy in antlers, which is better than luck because you can learn it. Historians still debate whether such hunts served primarily as martial drills for elites or as courtly theater where rank was performed to itself. Some scholars see a gym for spears and courage, others a stage where distribution of haunch and heart rehearsed obedience as much as appetite. The record is like horn notes the wind took liberties with. You let the argument slide around your ankles while you guide one more footfall onto the road's hidden rib for a second horse that never asked to memorize Pete. Joke 3 nips your ear. If anyone asks for your credentials, you will produce Saint Hinge, Saint Bracket, and Saint Don't Be Foolish and hope at least 2 are recognized by the College of Venery. The horn switches to a flurry that sounds like a tabletop argument and then to a long note that tastes of decision. Not the mort, that last, grave call belongs to a finish you do not want to be near, but a pull-out, a gather. The boar has voted alder for the last scene and even lords. Respect edits made by trees. A steward with a ledger face trots up the verge and thanks you in the coin of not threatening fines. He eyes your tally, the ferryman's thread, the forester's cross, and remarks that your paperwork is oddly aquatic and arboreal. You reply that it keeps its promises better than wax on a warm day. He almost smiles, like weather improving in a pocket, and offers news as payment. The ride east is in a mood to question strangers. He suggests you take the lower way where the coppice stools know about chairs and the charcoaler's blue can be smelled if rain keeps away. You accept the advice because it fits the grain of the day and because the dog with the honest nose touches your knee once in what you decide is a professional endorsement. Mainstream bead to finish the row, St. Hubert's cult tide hounds. Hunters and keys together, iron charms and ribbons on collars, legends of the stag with a crucifix between its antlers, and even heated Hubert's keys pressed to bites to ward the dread of mad dogs. Medicine sat in church pews then, and fear did too. You take the lower track where your staff can vote without panic, and the hunt unspools behind like a banner someone rolled carefully so it won't wrinkle when next they use it. You are both relieved and oddly tender toward their choreography. The horn grammar, the boy's oak leaves, the horse trusting a hidden road you learned by shins. hunt turned inside out, and, for a breath, everybody converted into student, Lord learning Pete, dogs learning Alder, you learning how not to become a punctuation mark in a sentence that had other plans. Joke 4 bows as the curtain falls on the Bracken stage. You promise to write The Drowned Causeway, a thank you note for its guest appearance as Structural Salvation, and to send it by the ferryman's copy editor made of water. The path ahead resumes its ASMR murmur. Your pockets inventory themselves. Red thread, notch, cross, 3 bent saints, a crumb of cheese promoted to relic, and your shoulders return to procession. Pace, not slow, not fast, but the speed of a story keeping its breath. Somewhere behind, the horn lays down one last strip of silver and goes quiet, and the forest, pleased to see ceremony pack its tents without insisting on a trophy, closes the brackets on the scene and lets you pass into the next clause. You walk the lower track the steward recommended, where coppice stools sit like old chairs and the air smells faintly of charcoal even when no cone sleeps nearby, and eyes keep happening. Not animal, leaf, burr, bark, faces that assemble when your attention gives them permission. A knot that smiles like a man who knows the punchline already. A pair of oak galls set in bark like watchful coins, and a split in a beach that looks exactly like someone saying shoo. Joke 1 clears its throat and suggests the forest has hired extra ushers. You salute with your whole hand, because pointing pricks, and because faces deserve nods. The path rounds a hazel clump and you see the thing the mismatched colors warned you about. Eastward, lintel with a smile that bites. Not a ruin this time, but a living beam sheltering a tiny wayside shelter where a lane shoulders the forest, 2 posts, 1 crosspiece, a low bench that learned patience from rain. Somebody once glazed a square of horn and set it like a window. It has gone blind with milkiness, yet still offers the courtesy of diffused light. In the center of the lintel a head emerges, not carved proud but grown from the wood like a conscience. Eyes round as hazelnuts, mouth making the shape of a whistle you cannot hear, and leaves that start at the lips and go everywhere. Ivy tongues, oak eyebrows, hawthorn beard. As if a hedge tried human grammar for a morning and liked it, you tilt the lantern slit and make it thinner, because proud light near a face like this feels like burlesque. Mainstream fact slides in with its notebook open. Foliate heads, what later writers will name green men, throng medieval churches and halls in stone and wood, roof bosses in Norwich and Exeter, capitals in countless parish naves, and under choir stalls on misericords where monks rested discreetly. Art historians classify them foliate, disgorging, bloodsucker heads, the last with leaves entering instead of leaving, proof that the motif was as much craft habit as symbol. And yes, the phrase green man will be coined centuries after your walk, by Lady Raglan in 1939, but the faces are older than the name and you are meeting one in its native habitat. Breath and hedge, you come closer, whole hand greeting, and find little accidents in the carving that feel like a signature. A shallow nick that might be a mason's mark, a leaf stem that curls into a shy initial, and one tooth slightly longer than its neighbor like a man who once bit into contentment and kept a splinter as a souvenir. Fringe detail hurries up with badly combed hair. Some carvers, so the craft gossip goes, sealed a sprig of the tree wood under a carved head. Oak leaf for oak, hornbeam for hornbeam, a way to remind the timber of its mother tongue, and some set a coin or a nail above the lintel to coax luck to audit the doorway. You resist prying with your own bent saints, bracket, hinge, and don't be foolish, who sit in your pocket and advise discretion. The head's eyes look not at you but past you. Across the lane toward a hedge where the leaves have staged another parliament and a real face, this one a robin's, blinks back as if admitted to the guild. You sit on the bench and let your ribs loosen into their procession pace. The forest begins listing what it wants you to remember. Green man faces recur not just in churches but in guild halls, castles' beam ends, and sometimes in pubs where names are badges. In signs named White Hart after kings, but Green Man after wood, a friendly neighbor idea of the wild that buys its ale on market day. Historians still debate whether this head means fertility and seasonal rebirth, a pagan echo wearing Christian stone, whether it guards thresholds like a leafy gargoyle, whether it is simply a carver's delight in scrolls turned into eyebrows, or whether we make it mean too much because we want faces to explain walls. Some read echoes of Pan, others a parable of mortality, leaves curling from mouths like the truth that we are compost with opinions. Your own vote today is small and practical. Face equals welcome. Welcome equals do not break anything. You watch the mouth where leaves pour and think of all the mouths that have poured words. Beneath it, pilgrims with scallops, swineherds bell-tired, charcoalers teaching vent grammar, and decide to pour a scrap of news yourself as toll. You tell the head quietly about the drowned causeway that let you pass by, honoring ribs under tea-colored water, about the hunt that turned inside out and learned Pete's grammar for an hour, about the white stag who bowed like an usher and refused your resume, and about the ashroot bundle. Hair, time, bent nails, doing its job without dancers. The face listens, because wood is good at it, and the head's mouth, leaf busy, looks like the world breathing the world. Joke 2 tugs your sleeve. You resist asking whether your own hair would sprout ivy if you stood under this lintel long enough. You choose instead to test its acoustics, a whisper, good, a hum, better. You hum the shepherd's kyrie and the head receives it the way a patient door receives knocks. Turning contact into resonance, above your head in the slice of horn pane, someone has etched a little wheel with 6 petals, a daisy again, the same 6-point you saw at the Grange and on a muddy plinth by a boundary bridge. Hexfoil is a tribe you keep seeing. Geometry is pest net, and here it has been scratched with a nail, probably by the same hand that left their mark in the leaf curl. Continuity makes the nerves under your sternum stand at attention. In a pleasant way, mainstream bead to keep your memory honest. Apotropaic, which marks not only daisies but Marian sigils, mesh patterns, graze many thresholds, barns, and beams. Charm scratches against bad luck in an age that seasoned its faith with household insurance. Sermons could frown and hands could still draw. You raise your palm to the etch lightly, not a caress. A signature in air. A wren comes, hops into the shelter, inspects your bootlace with professional skepticism, then vanishes into the foliage face as if entering a colleague's beard to deliver gossip. The lintel's smile seems to have bitten your anxiety into smaller chews. You inventory your resources. Red thread on the ferryman's notch, forester's cross at the end, 3 bent saints, 1 crumb of cheese that has been promoted through several bureaucracies, charcoaler's taboos, boundary stone's memory, moss's corrective ego, and you feel like a person whose pockets are a household. The head's eyes tilt just enough that you follow their angle to spot a green shadow deeper. In the hedge, not a bird, not a deer, leaf assembly again, but eerily well-aligned, 2 elder leaves for eyes, a seed head for a nose, and a slit where the lane shows through that can pass for a smile if you are ready to pay for the illusion with kindness, and you are. You talk your pocket nails and think this is how people teach children to be fond of difficult places. Give the difficulty a face. Greet it and tell it a true small story. Historians still debate whether the Green Man is a modern umbrella that encourages us to drag disparate medieval foliate heads into one parade, or whether medieval eyes truly saw one character, wearing many leaves. The parade theory scolds our hunger for coherence, the character theory consoles it. You leave the argument under the lintel and do the thing you were warned to do. You nod to the biting smile as if it keeps tally. Because some faces do, you ask permission to pass east. You pay in news and small gratitude. And you get up, the bench answers with 1 thoughtful creak which you file as a yes. Fringe custom slips in wearing May garlands and wood smoke. Some places carry greenery into houses on the first morning of May, so walls will remember woods, hawthorn beds, and birch doors. And while you are not in May, you are in a mood adjacent to it. You tuck a single ivy leaflet, not plucked, fallen, into your hatband as a loan and tell yourself you will return it to the next stream like a debt paid with interest and temperature. Joke 3 volunteers to name the leaf Kevin for administrative purposes, and you deny the request with prejudice. Your feet return to the lane, and you keep the head in peripheral vision long enough to confirm that faces in would prefer not to be stared at like curiosities, and do their best work when treated as neighbors, which is to say they earn gossip and protection, not explanation. You move on, and the forest keeps manufacturing gentle pareidolia as if to keep you trained. A knot winks, a fungus makes a set of incredulous lips under a birch shelf, and an entire tree in the distance insists on being a man with a hood until you near it, and it admits being a beach that tried theater once and enjoyed applause. Your staff taps in time with these small recognitions, and your breath has forgotten panic's tempo. A good sign that Chapter 20 is not yet here to demand oaths, but coming. Yes, you can feel the moonlit hinge somewhere ahead, your pockets, having had their metronome checked by St. Hinge, sound content, and you realize that the faces have given you something practical, a trick for the ordeal when it arrives. If fear is a wall, put a face on it and bow. Fear may yet bite, but it will bite you as a citizen, not a trespasser. The sun grays toward the side of afternoon that trains itself for dusk, and you take one last look back, unhurried, at the lintel. 2 midges draw tiny ellipses in the air by its cheek. A spider crosses from leaf eyebrow to leaf eyelash and writes an argument for tensile strength, and the wood, patient, leaf breathing, holds not as metaphor, as carpentry. Your last fact sets itself down like a stool and waits to be sat on. Misericords, the undersides of choir stalls, often carry foliate heads and small jokes, buttocks resting under saints on wood that grins, a parallel art to your own habit of tucking jokes under solemn walking. You like that, jokes as leaf work under liturgy. You step forward, 1 foot, then the next, carrying the biting smile like a travel document that says you have visited the Embassy of Green and left your name without causing trouble. You resolve to pass your next threshold with the same grammar, whole hand, no pointed prongs, pay in news and attention, and when Bracken rehearses its sense of humor by pretending to be a hanging snare, you nod to the memory, decline to stick your waist into traps twice, and proceed, instruction embedded. The leaves look on, fewer and friendlier than they did an hour ago, because you have remembered to look back with a face of your own rather than a diagram. And the forest, which respects a guest who learns, opens its path a polite inch wider without turning into a road. You follow alder breath downhill until the path loses every other word and the river supplies them, glossed in pewter, moving without asking permission. And the boat is there the way a sentence is there once you remember its verb, 1 plank thick, ribs honest, 1 or working the stern like a long wrist. The ferryman wears the same hat that has lived 20 lives, and he measures you the way a miller measures sacks. Weight with story attached. You raise your whole hand. No pointing, because pointing pricks, and keep the lantern slit shy because proud flame on water feels like a dare. He says nothing until you step to the post that looks like a hedgehog made of St. Metals and bent nails. Then he says payment, but make it something that will matter tomorrow, not today, and you almost laugh because that is exactly his brand. Joke 1 clears its throat. You tell him you have already paid in cheese to a hound, iron shavings to him, attention to the forest, and that your remaining assets are 3 bent saints, bracket, hinge, and don't be foolish, 1 crumb of cheese promoted beyond its competence, a tally with his notch and the forester's cross, and a pocket full of news that prefers to be current affairs. He lifts the oar and listens to it like a doctor. The thole pin answers with a tired cough. He taps it with a knuckle and the boat clears its throat. I need a small hinge where a future will sit safely, he says, and your pocket saints look at you, disguised as nails but not obligated to stick forever. You choose Saint Hinge because names love being called to their work, and lay the bent nail in his palm. He tests its temper against wood, nods once, then ties a red thread through the bend, the same domestic scarlet he looped on your tally back when you did not yet know how often a thread would keep you. He works the nail into the worn thole as if he were pinning tomorrow to a workable angle, Mainstream fact stands quietly at your elbow. Ferries in medieval Europe were franchises and duties. The right of ferry held by lords, abbeys, or towns. Tolls called passage or pontage recorded in Latin that smells of wax. Some ferries kept chapels or a painted St. Christopher near the landing, as insurance for the soul. Bridge chapels too, little rooms of prayer on stone spans where water taught doctrine in a different grammar. You picture a river saint listening while boots thud on planks and petitions lift like oars. The ferryman watches you watch and counts something in his head. Not coin, not guilt, travel days perhaps. Souls moved across. Joke 2 offers to become a soul in good standing, and the ferryman rejects the application because you are already a decent ledger entry. You step into the boat and it tilts just enough to remind you that humility prevents baptism by accident. He pushes off and the oar writes a long calligraphy you are content not to translate. The river edits your reflection until your face looks like a story it knows. The ferryman asks for news with the caution of a man who distrusts headlines but respects local. You pay with the safe coins. The drowned causeway gave you ribs under tea-colored breath. The hunt learned Pete for an hour and elected to leave the boar to alder. A green man's lintel bit anxiety into bite-sized pieces. The ash, because someone trusted wood to watch while they slept. He nods at each item, the way he nodded when you first named boundary stones. Some people pay with trouble. He says finally, they give me news that wants to be a fight. I prefer nails. I prefer oars that will still carry tomorrow. Historians still debate whether rivers in the Middle Ages were chiefly borders that multiplied tolls and courts, or highways that stitched markets tighter than roads could. Charters and toll lists look like fences. Boat registers and grain accounts look like arteries. As usual, the record is a braid. Water separating and joining with the same wet logic. Your ribs accept both truths while the current tests the boat's manners. On the second stroke, the patched thole sings a better note. St. Hinge does his job, and you relax a notch you did not know. You were tightening. The ferryman says he keeps account not in passengers but in favors. He wants a future where his boat works and his neighbors bring to him the kind of problems that can be solved with timber and knots. You ask what his neighbors bring now. He says out loud, rushes for seats, fishtails, wet shoes, and quietly mistakes. He taps the oar again. If I ask for coin, they miss dinner. If I ask for a promise, they forget. If I take a nail, tomorrow holds a little better. Fringe detail steps aboard without ticket. He says he once refused a silver coin and took, instead, a half shoe for a child, convinced the rest would be found by luck if parents were nudged. He says a nail hammered at the right hour hums with less superstition and more mercy than a purse. The river notes your soft laugh and declines to capsize you as punishment. The far bank approaches as a smear that becomes a hedge, a post, a path. He grounds the prow with a sand-quiet sound and hands you a fresh willow slip, peel and ready. He notches it with a tidy slash, a sibling to your first notch, and ties a red thread very carefully through it as if stitching a cut. You ask what this proof pays for. He says nothing today, everything tomorrow. Show it to a man who has to choose between a pleasure and a path. Tell him a ferryman asked that he prefer the path. Joke 3 grins. You tell him you know several men who alphabetize pleasures before paths. He tips the hat that has lived 20 lives and mutters something that could be a saint's name or just a river word for patience. Mainstream bead to steady the thought. Some ferries were obligated to run day and night. Bells or horns hung at landings for calls in fog. Duty kept in ledgers alongside tolls, which meant that rivers taught communities to write the hour into fairness. Even when weather argued, you step out with whole hand thanks and are ready to go when he lifts the oar into the boat and says, "One more toll, not now. Later, I want a story about the map you will make from what you have walked. Not the tidy map with distances and mills, the one you can recite in the dark, the one that makes a boy or an old woman know where she is without looking. That will matter tomorrow to someone who has to cross in fog and can only carry a story. You promise because you have already started stitching that map in your chest with moss and bells and snare grammar. He is already turning the boat when you add a tithe of your own. There is a shrine in the bog where a clay dish keeps a stubborn candle from wet. If you have a spare coin made of patience, leave it there on a dry day. He allows his mouth one corner, then rows backward into current like a man who has rear-view mirrors for eyes. A little distance off he pauses, sets the oar flat, and sculls the stern with a figure 8 that looks like a lazy alphabet. Quieter, older than rowing, the boat answering with feline grace. And you admire a craft that moves a world with a wrist. Historians still debate how widely that sculling trick lived on rivers. Here, common on punts and in eastern harbors, rare names in Latin margins. But your eyes claim the fact today and need no footnote to keep it. You wait until he is far enough not to feel watched, and then tack your own nail. Saint, don't be foolish, against the landing post for a moment. Press the iron to wood to feel the temperature where many hands have tested tomorrow, and return it to your pocket because you still need commas. You read the hedgehog post the way a person reads a parish notice board. Metal scab there, Hubert's cross, Genevieve's flame, old wax drips, a strip of someone's charter torn like yours and tacked by nails in a quick bureaucracy of luck. And a small bead of glass that tries to be a river eye. Fringe lore winks from under a reed hat. Some watermen call passengers souls, not to be pious but to count what mounts and dismounts without fake precision, a respectful unit that includes breath and trouble. You step away because the landing likes to be a door, not a parlor, and the path up the bank works at being a stair. Alder turning to beach, beach to birch, and your feet slipping back into the syntax of forest after the quick clarity of water. You think about what will matter tomorrow and make a list. Nails and oarlocks, names on stones. The habit of showing all 5 fingers when you step onto someone else's grass. The charcoaler's grammar of quiet. The ash root bundle doing its small job without applause. The way a white stag bowed to the laws of thirst and left you a hoofprint full of drink. The way the drowned causeway asked you to hum a kyrie to keep from dancing into tea. The way a lintel face taught you to put mouths on walls and bow to them because fear is easier when it has a face and a place to listen. Historians still debate whether travel like yours was rare bravado or ordinary necessity, whether most people lived and died within ringing distance of their parish bells, or whether feet wandered more, carrying gossip and grain and love letters disguised as errands. Court rolls show fines for straying pigs and men. Poems praise pilgrims and mock them. The truth, as ever, is patchwork. Your life currently fits through the needle of necessity and curiosity tied together with red thread. And the ferryman is correct. The important part is what survives the crossing to feed tomorrow. You crest the bank and find an old milestone smothered in moss that tries to lie again. The sun argues with it and you mediate, whole hand on stone, staff testing the next clause of path. Joke 4 appears late and reliable. You tell the world you will file a review for the ferry. Excellent service, minimal conversation, accepts nails, would cross again. And the forest, who does not read reviews, nevertheless approves your tone by letting the path be a generous inch wider. You tuck the willow slip with red thread into the same pocket as your tally and feel your chest adopt traffic laws that protect small boats. No boasting, no rushing near turns, no loud music in sleeping woods. And as evening begins to rehearse its curtain call, you aim yourself toward another appointment, tomorrow's map in your mouth. A nail's decision humming in a thole behind you, and the sense that the river has filed you as a decent line in its ledger. Paid not with coin that bruises, but with a hinge that will hold whenever a wrist remembers what to do. You climb from the ferry's gloss into trees that speak cartography in whispers, and decide to make the map the ferryman asked for while your boots are still wet enough to take notes. You begin where a good map begins, with a legend, not the kind wearing antlers or saints' hats, but a list of signs your feet understand. Red thread means a promise that keeps walking. Daisy wheels mean a doorway learned to wrestle bad luck. Moss means north unless water lobbies harder. Bells mean inventory, not panic. Charcoal blue on the air means hush your verbs. Rope and bracken means do not be a headline. Joke 1 lifts its hand like a novice clerk. You add, cheese means honesty passes inspection, because bureaucrats with wet noses have never falsified an audit in your presence. You talk to yourself at the speed that soothes paths, and your staff punctuates in priestly taps as if approving chapters. Mainstream fact puts on its spectacles and takes the bench. People hear measured roads as sentences, not diagrams, itineraries listing towns and bridge names and saints' days like beads. And farther afield, monks drew the Hereford Mappa Mundi around 1300. A globe squashed flat with Jerusalem at the heart and marvels at the edges. More theology than turn by turn. While the later Gough map sketched England with towns pricked and red lines like veins. One of the first road maps to think in distances, though scholars still quarrel whether it served travelers, officials, or the kind of person who likes to see a country behave on vellum. You vote for all three because vellum enjoys being useful, and because your own map will be both prayer and logistics. You start at Roman stones because every spine needs bones. Then the dare nailed to a hedgehog post by the ferry. The charcoaler's grammar of vents and listening. The snare that taught you to fall carefully and not to practice convenience with saplings. The forester and his arithmetic of mast and fines. Wolves who count opportunities while bells count reasons. Pilgrims whose shells became spoons and proofs. Moss that lied politely until water corrected it. The grange whose owl doorway kept barley tidy. The stag who bowed like a courteous usher and then let the world be animal again. Stones that mark parishes by attendance. Livery that tried to become a toll but settled for news. A hair-time bundle bent to kindness with iron grammar. Feast fires that stitched a district into one brief ember. The drowned causeway that asked for him tempo. A hunt turned inside out by Pete. A green man lintel that bit your worry into chewable ideas. And the ferryman who prefers to be paid in hinges so tomorrow can pivot. Joke 2 proposes that you launch a startup called Map, an app that reroutes you toward the next courteous decision. You decline issuing stock, but allow the name to sit on a stump briefly, and preen, the path south by east gets thoughtful where hazel closes ranks and you write a corner on your inner parchment, under hazel where coppice rings where years like tree bracelets. And add, turn at the beach with the split that says shoe, because faces help minds cooperate. The lane forks, one way bragging in mud, one in thorns, and you choose the thorn because it leaves your pride whole. You add this to your key, thorns guard ways that want you humbled. Mud guards ways that want you heavy, not a compass point, but your kind of accuracy. Mainstream bead returns with ink steadied by T at sea. Portalon charts gave navigators reticulations. Wind roses and rum lines that let straight courses ignore curvature. You admire the elegance and admit that your corner of land uses different roses. Your rums are the angle of a rook's hinge, the taste of iron, the way Alder writes vertical poetry before water. Fringe detail leans in with a feather in its cap. A shepherd once told you he kept a feather from the home goose in his hat because it would turn with small breezes and remind his nose where supper lived. Nonsense, perhaps, but the hat looked like it had believed harder things, and faith in feathers seems kinder than faith in shouting. You store the feather in your map's margin, a pictograph for going home. You test your memory aloud, not names alone but tastes and motions. Leave the ferry by the hedgehog post prickled with metals. Show 5 fingers to any grass that looks like it was planted by a person with a ledger. Tap stones once and say present. Follow the rook that sounds like a hinge until the beach with the good split. Bow where faces look out of bark. Never count aloud near sleeping fire. Never whistle to wind when the wood is holding its breath. You hear yourself and wonder if instruction and prayer are the same species said differently. Historians still debate whether most people stayed within a day's bell or wandered more widely by errands disguised as piety and trade. Some read court rolls and think the parish was a hard border. Others read miracle stories and guild records and see webs of feet. Your own souls have tangled into both truths. You feel stitched to one strip of county and yet threaded into a cloth of ferries and fires. Your map will not pick a side. It will pick a speed, procession pace. Here you slow because this is a place where lost happens in a kind way. Birch repeats itself until birch seems the only letter the alphabet knows. You remember the child with willow twigs who called his bundle a pathfinder, and you imitate the gesture with your staff. Not dowsing, simply asking ground to stop pretending. A runnel answers by becoming mildly audible, and the splay of sedge tilts its hair east like advice. You add sedge comb to your key. You practice what you will say to the ferryman when you pay his toll of story later. You will tell him the country can be recited, from the ash with the hair time hush under its root to the lintel that eats anxiety, from the corn dolly's shadow in the grange to the street. John Wheel that balanced or did not, from the drowned causeway ribs to the alder that keeps boars from turning hounds into grammar, from the hound who appraises cheese to the boy who braided oak leaves while he waited his turn to be necessary. You will list the saints embroidered into the map's edges. Hubert for honest dogs, Genevieve for candle flares, John for smoke, and 3 bent iron brothers who prefer commas to exclamation marks. Joke 3 knocks, you brief your boots on there. Professional development goals, less noise in sleeping woods, improved diplomacy with Bracken, continuing education in not stepping on your own stick, and your boots accept the training with a creak that could be enthusiasm. The day thins, which is not the same as ends, and you practice your night map out loud because knowing where your mouth is going matters. You will speak each feature for its sound as much as its name, the clink of a chain across a distant pasture, the curlew's question, the frog that likes to be a doorbell, the particular treble of a pilgrim's pipe, and the bass of a horn that belongs to a cow, not a lord. You add scent to your legend. Iron means water honest enough to drink. Peat means arguments to be deferred. Nettle means kitchens are within 2 fields. Charcoal means patience is required in sentences and in flame. Beeswax means barns that count carefully and feed on time. A personal geography, which is to say useful mainstream fact nods, medieval memory techniques, loved rooms of the mind. The ars memoriae, building places inside skulls where images hung on pegs. Some preachers kept entire cathedrals in their heads with sermon steps hung on traceries and bosses. You steal the method happily. Hang your charcoaler on a vent eye, your forester on a tally notch, your ferryman on an oarlock, your stag on a hoof print that tastes of metal cold enough to answer thirst, your boundary stones on the word present spoken in willow, your snare on the creek you no longer hear because you learned to step sideways. Debate sits down beside you like a polite uncle and asks which map the Goff map was. Clerk's instrument, traveler's recitation, or pride's portrait. You answer that while vellum wrangles. Abstractions, your body is drawing a supplement the clerk forgot. Distances measured in breaths and jokes, in bows, and in the number of things you decline to touch. It makes you smile, and your map likes smiles because they keep attention awake without scolding. You reach a small clearing where 3 paths perform the dance of temptation. 1 too straight to be honest, 1 too pretty to be kind, 1 plain as good bread. You pay with habit and choose bread. Not out of lack of adventure, but because your map prefers verbs it can trust, and you label this junction decision loaf, a term you intend to teach anyone kind enough to borrow your route. Fringe lore hops up wearing a fool's cap and offers you the old trick that if you do not know which way to go, you should stand still until a wren gives you direction. You stand, and a wren materializes as if obeying a union rule, scolds you, and then hops toward the honest path as if to collect a fee of crumbs. Later, you pay in gratitude and make a new symbol, tiny beak marks. For where small teachers were found, night slides in on felt feet, and you test your map against the dark the way a shepherd tests his bell against fog. You hum the Kyrie to set tempo and let it fold you into the lane between alders. Your lantern keeps its slit like a secret taught to it by coal and humility. Your staff finds a trodden sill that leads to a plank over a runnel. You name the plank comma and keep moving. Bells ring far off where someone is still arguing with a wheel and a hill. You log the sound as a fence against fear rather than an advertisement of anxiety. Your pockets talk softly with bent saints, commas in metronome form, and for a moment you feel how a good map is not a way out of being lost. It is a way into being found kindly. Joke 4 suggests you add a dragon to the corner for readers who fear completion. You sketch in your head a rook wearing a horn for a hat instead, a creature native to this country. less likely to bite cartographers. The path remembers it is allowed to be generous and widens 1 inch. You taste iron and teach your tongue not to panic. Water soon, yes, but not a bog with arguments. A ford perhaps, and you make the notation, 2 steady stones underfoot like teeth that do not mind. Your step, you place them in your story and they become memory, which is the only cartography you can carry if fog eats moon. Your last line before the map closes for the night is to thank the ground out loud. Not a prayer to the forest exactly, more a receipt sent to the place for services rendered without complaint. You will pay again tomorrow with listening, which is the toll that leaves bridges standing, and you will carry the mouth map to the ferryman when he asks for the story. And the boy on the hill who must choose between a pleasure and a path can borrow your legend and walk to bread, without testifying to mud. You lift the willow slip, stroke its red thread with the finger that taps tally marks, and teach yourself the journey by heart one more time so that when the ordeal lifts its moon at midnight and asks for your papers, you can present your map as proof that being a guest here taught you how not to be lost in the ways that matter. Midnight asks its quiet question and the forest answers by standing very still, so still you hear dew deciding where to land. And then the summons arrives, not a horn, not a bell, 3 knocks in the language of wood. A beech rapping its own rib where wind turns the aisle like a sacristan. You sit up under your hedge of thoughts, lantern slit thin to courtesy, pockets taking attendance by touch, ferryman's red thread tally, forester's cross, 3 bent saints, bracket, hinge, and don't be foolish, and the willow slip he gave you yesterday for tomorrow. Joke 1 yawns and suggests ignoring midnight because all respectable dilemmas keep office hours. You decline on the grounds that respectability lost jurisdiction about 20 trees back. The knocks repeat, farther along the boundary track, and you follow procession pace. No stamping, whole hand greetings to anything that might take offense. The beech that rapped first stands like a bailiff, and beyond it the roofless grange shines pewter where swallows have folded the rafters into sleep. A handful of figures gather at the nave of air. Faces you know by posture more than features. The forester with his counting stick, the reeve wearing his lemon peel smile like a livery, and 2 parish men who smell like peat and worry. A girl stands between them, braid unbraiding itself with the speed of fear. She holds a ribbon of blue, cousin to the red that keeps following you, and says her brother went to fetch a stray piglet and did not return. The reeve says the chase lies between here and there, and the law has its own midnight. The forester says the drowned causeway sulks if you shout at it, and every voice turns to the one person here, who has recently argued the bog into lending a few ribs, which is to say you. The reeve lifts a paper with a broken seal, the torn cousin of the charter you nailed to the hedge pig ferry post, and says oath you promised 3 days and 2 nights for safe passage and proof. Your time crapses through his fingers like sand as he points at the moon. You can get back to town by dawn if you take the Lord's chase and pretend the forester invited you, or you can keep to the bounds and fail the dare and the debt. And there is also the child, whose path is shorter if you use the chase and longer if you keep vows tidy. The forester says nothing, which is the loudest permission he can offer. The forest adds a footnote. A wolf in the far trees testing a note it might not use. Mainstream fact steadies the floor under your feet. In these centuries men knew ordeals by fire and water. Iron carried 3 paces in the hand or a cord that dragged wrists from a boiling pot. And the 4th Lateran Council in 1215 forbade clergy to bless such proofs, turning judgment toward juries and oaths sworn by neighbors. Law wore many faces in the night, but in the royal forests it also wore verdures and swanemotes, courts under leaves that measured trespass in oak and venison. What is summoned now is not exactly a court, but it stands as one judge, jury, and echo. You run the arithmetic. Oath, path, child, law, dawn, debt, and the red thread in your pocket pulls tight like a tug from the ferryman's patient wrist. The reeve's mouth wants you to say chase and hurry. The forester's silence wants you to remember that bridges stay up when people pay and care, not shortcuts. Your map, recited to the river, reminds you that thorns protect what is honest and mud protects what is heavy. You take one slow breath and choose. You say you will guide by the causeway's ribs and keep to bounds. Oath will be paid in the time it takes to help, not the time it takes to cheat. The reef smiles like a purse being closed and says, the clock does not enjoy mercy. The forester says mercy is how clocks stay true in winter. And the girl looks at you as if your staff were a lantern. Joke 2 files a brief that says you will now discover how fast a procession can move without resigning from being a procession. You accept the brief and begin, no counting aloud, no pointing, whole hand yes to the dark. You set the tune with the shepherd's kyrie because the bog respects hymns and ankles. The forester falls in at your shoulder. The reeve a paced yard behind like a ledger that hates to be revised. The ribbon of blue ties itself in your memory to the red on your tally and the blue at the boundary stone, a braid of small vows. You reach the tea-brown gloss and the reed applause begins. You talk to the earth the way the charcoaler did to his sleeping fire, soft, specific. The staff knocks a peg and you whisper there. Then there you find the old brushwood ribs by taste of sound, and the party crosses in the grammar you learned yesterday. Ankles that listen, knees that apologize. Breath that refuses to brag. A will-o'-the-wisp writes a shrugging S to your left, and the reeve mutters a curse that has been laundered in church Latin. Fringe detail taps your sleeve to remind you that some swore a morsel of cursed bread. The coarsened could choke the perjured if a priest spoke the right line. A custom that sits halfway between law and theater. You prefer brushwood to bread for tonight's test. The far half holds. Alder begins to write vertical psalms, and you hear the piglet before the child. A bell the size of honesty tinkling where the bank eats its own foot. The girl runs and you do not stop her because some running is not panic but syntax. She finds her brother stuck to the bog by both shins and his pride. You and the forester become a bridge with 2 hands and a stick, no heroics, just weight spread like good bread. And the boy comes away from the tea with the sound of attack being pulled from wood. He shakes and laughs because laughing is the body's way of changing subject. The piglet will not be caught by words, only by a small net of arms. And the girl proves fluent. She tucks the animal into her cloak as if a psalm had endorsed the method. You turn and lead back the way you came. The causeway grants the return with the same grave kindness, and the forester breathes out a note that tastes like approval. The reeve keeps his breath on a leash. Historians still debate whether common folk were pressed under laws like these or navigated them with a practical intelligence that turned charters into tools. Some read rolls of fines and see fear. Others read the same ink and see arguments. Villagers often won by showing up with good memory and better neighbors. The record is patchwork. You have decided to be a patch that holds. At the grange the air lightens. The owl doorway keeps its ledger of mice while people write a quick minutes of relief. The reeve says the hour has eaten your promise. Dawn will not arrive with you under its arm. You hold up the willow slip from the ferryman. The second proof, the red thread he tied as if stitching a cut in time. The forester turns your tally over, shows the reeve his cross and the ferryman's notch, then points with his whole hand at the rescued boy. The reckoning stands in front of you. Not on paper, he says, pontage can mend planks. Tonight you mended a family. The reeve chews his lemon and calls it irregular kindness, which is still kindness. Joke 3. You congratulate yourself on having invented the irregular kindness tax and promise to remit more of it whenever the world insists. The reeve, who does not hear the joke, says the debt still waits if your feet do not become faster than justice by noon. And you bow because debt loves deference as much as coin. The girl unties her blue ribbon and ties it around your wrist for a breath. Then back to her own because the forest prefers vows to be wearable by their owners. She thanks you with a word that fits, better than any oath present, and the stones around you, lichen-bitten clerks, seem to answer present in damp chorus. You turn to go because map and dare still exist when mercy has had its turn. And the forester stops you with a touch of his stick to your tally. He adds a small mark none of your pockets understand, a notch like a fish's breath, and says the ride east will miscount strangers if you carry this. You will look like someone who belongs to the arithmetic of mass and fines rather than to the arithmetic of lords. Mainstream bead puts on one more sensible coat. Hue and cry, the old neighbor's alarm, obliged men to chase felons by night. Watchmen rattled clappers on parish lanes. Frank pledge bound households to answer for one another. Law was social before it was paperwork. You have just practiced the neighbor part and hope the paperwork forgives you. You choose the lower track where coppice stools remember chairs and green men smile with the bite taken out of your fear. And the forest, pleased to have been court. Jury and echo without also being gallows opens its path the polite inch that means go now. Pay the rest in daylight. The moon sits on a boundary post like a seal cooling on wax, and for a moment the hedgehog post by the ferry appears in your mind with its metals and strips and nails. You imagine the ferryman sleeping with his or leaning like a question he expects you to answer tomorrow with a map in your mouth. You intend to keep that appointment. Joke for tips its cap and asks whether you can be both lawful and late and still solvent. You answer that solvency tonight is measured in ribs spared from tea, in piglets returned from auditioning as legends, and in blue ribbon that did not have to learn grief. Your feet accept the definition and increase their tempo from prayer to brisk hymn. You hum a line because hymns were invented for this, and the trees who have served as bench and rail and gallery. All night, file out of their own court one leaf at a time, satisfied that the judgment carried no gloating, only a sentence that reads, go, and return with proof that includes more than paper. You walk 1 foot, then the next, toward a noon that will demand signatures and a parting that will not be a goodbye, only a turning of the page, and as the last beach behind you wraps its rib once. Receipt issued, you feel the forest's verdict written along your bones. Guest present, in good standing, pending further stories.